In the misty hills of Tennessee, a little girl sang to the mountains. Her voice carried through the cold mornings and echoed through a cabin with no electricity, no running water, but filled with faith and fire. That voice would travel farther than anyone could imagine, from wooden floors to world stages. This is the story of Dolly Parton, the girl who turned poverty into poetry and struggle into song. A story of relentless kindness, genius, and a heart that refused to harden. Because sometimes, the brightest lights are born from the darkest nights. Chapter 1. The Song in the Mountains. In the great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, the mornings start before the sun. The fog rolls down the hills like a whisper, wrapping around the wooden cabins that cling to the slopes. Inside one of those cabins, a little girl named Dolly Rebecca Parton wakes before dawn. She isn't thinking about fame. She isn't dreaming of gold records or bright lights. She's thinking about breakfast and about singing while she waits. Her family was poor but not broken. 12 children, one roof, no electricity, no running water. When it rained, it leaked. When the fire died, the cold bit through the boards. And when money ran out, which was often, the Partons did what they'd always done. They sang. Her mother, Avi Lee, had the voice of an angel that had been through hard times. Her father, Robert Lee, couldn't read or write, but he carried dignity like a coat he never took off. From them, Dolly learned her first lesson, that pride isn't arrogance, it's survival with grace. In the evenings, her mother would hum gospel tunes while rocking the youngest child to sleep. Dolly, just a few years old, would harmonize, not because anyone taught her, because she couldn't not sing. That was the first spark, a sound that could make the world softer. Life in Sevier County was simple, but simplicity doesn't mean easy. Dolly hauled water from the creek, tended animals, and shared a bed with siblings stacked like firewood. At night, she'd lie awake listening to the crickets and think about the stars. Her imagination built a universe above that cabin, one where she was already singing to thousands. She once said, "We were poor, but I never felt poor because we had things that money couldn't buy: love, faith, and music." But even as a child, she sensed that her voice carried something fragile and powerful, a way to escape, to lift everyone with her. When the church held gatherings, Dolly would be the first to volunteer. She sang hymns louder than the grown-ups, her small frame shaking with joy. People would whisper, "That little Parton girl's got something special." And in that whisper, destiny began to form its shape. There's a story her family still tells, of Dolly at 5 years old, standing on the front porch, a tin can in her hand for a microphone. She performed for the chickens, the pigs, and her brothers who rolled their eyes but listened anyway. That tin can became her first stage. Those hills became her first audience. Every child dreams, but few dream so vividly that the dream becomes instruction. For Dolly, the dream was direction, a road winding out of those mountains. But she didn't yet know how far it would take her, or what it would cost to leave. There's a certain kind of strength born only from poverty, the kind that makes you invent joy where there's none. When there's no television, you learn to tell stories. When there's no money, you learn to make magic from scraps. Dolly's mother stitched her dresses from feed sacks. One day, Dolly begged her to make something brighter, something that looked like the dresses she saw in catalogs. Her mother sewed her a patchwork coat made of every color they could find. It wasn't new. It wasn't perfect. But when Dolly wore it to school, she glowed with pride, until the other children laughed. That night, tears hit the same fabric that had made her so proud that morning. But Dolly didn't stay broken. She looked at that coat and saw a story, not a shame. Years later, she'd turn it into one of her most beloved songs. Coat of many colors. That's who Dolly was, even then. A weaver of pain into melody. Every insult became ink. Every hardship a verse. The mountains taught her music first, before fame, before studios, before microphones. The rhythm of rain on the roof became percussion. The whistle of the wind was harmony. The heartbeat of her father splitting wood was bass. The melody of her mother's lullabies was the line she carried into every song she would ever write. In those hills, music wasn't a dream. It was a necessity, because when you've got nothing else, singing is a way to keep hope breathing. Looking back, it's easy to see how destiny looked inevitable. But at that moment, there was no Dolly Parton, the brand, the legend. There was just a girl, barefoot in the dirt, holding a stick like a microphone and a dream like a secret she couldn't tell anyone. Because who would believe that a child from a place so forgotten could ever be remembered? Yet maybe that's what the universe does with the humble. It hides greatness in plain sight, waiting for courage to dig it out. Every note she sang was a shovel in that dirt. She didn't have piano lessons or vocal coaches. She had fields and silence and faith. And that was enough. When she sang, it wasn't just about notes. It was about longing for something she couldn't name, something bigger than herself. Maybe that's why, even decades later, people cry when they hear her voice. Because it doesn't just sound beautiful, sounds true. One night, as her mother tucked her in, Dolly whispered, "Mama, one day I'm gonna sing on the radio." Her mother smiled, not with doubt, but with understanding. She'd seen that kind of certainty before. In prophets, not children. That dream became Dolly's North Star. And though she couldn't see the path yet, she could feel it humming under her skin, like a string ready to vibrate. Every morning she'd sing louder. Every evening she'd listen harder, to birds, to rain, to silence, training her ear like an instinct. And without knowing it, she was preparing for a lifetime of creation. Because before you can sing to the world, you have to learn to hear it. In later years, she'd say that those early days were her University of the Hills. That everything she ever needed to know about melody, emotion, and human truth came from those mountains. They shaped her vowels, her humor, her heart, and they never left her, even when she left them. The world would soon discover that Dolly Parton wasn't just born into music, she was forged by it. Her songs would carry the same strength as the hills that raised her. Unpolished, unpretentious, unstoppable. That little girl, barefoot and singing to chickens, didn't know that one day her songs would comfort millions. That one day, the world would hum along to the voice that once echoed through a cabin in Sevier County. She only knew that when she sang, the pain stopped. And that was enough reason to keep singing. It's strange how destiny hides in such small moments. Tinkin, patchwork coat, a promise whispered to the mountains. They were all chapters waiting to be written. And though the road ahead would be paved with rejection, sacrifice, and relentless work, the fire had already been lit. Every great journey begins with a song that only the singer can hear. Dolly's first melody was not about fame. It was about freedom. The freedom to imagine more, to believe in light before seeing it. And from that cabin, surrounded by the Smoky Mountains, she began to hum the life that would one day make the whole world listen. But the mountains could only echo her for so long. The world beyond was calling her name. Chapter 2. Radio Dreams. The mountains could only keep her voice for so long. Every echo, every hymn sung in that little church, every porch performance before the chickens, it all carried one direction, outward. The world was waiting, even if it didn't know her name yet. It started with a sound, the crackle of a transistor radio her uncle kept by his bedside. Through that tiny speaker, the young Dolly Parton first heard what else sounded like the world beyond the Smoky Mountains. Voices smooth as velvet, guitars that shimmered like electricity. For the first time she realized music could travel, and maybe, just maybe, so could she. At 10 years old, Dolly already had a stage presence you couldn't ignore. Her uncle Bill Owens recognized it and decided to take her gift seriously. He'd play guitar beside her as she sang at local fairs and radio shows, her pigtails bouncing, her smile unshakable. Most of the time they got paid in food or sometimes just applause. But to Dolly, applause was currency enough. She said once, "I didn't dream of money. I dreamed of people hearing me." That was her North Star, the idea that her voice could reach beyond the hollers and fields, into lives she'd never see. Every Sunday, when the family radio buzzed with programs from Knoxville, Dolly would listen and imagine her own voice coming through those wires. She'd picture strangers stopping their chores, leaning closer, saying, "Who's that girl?" It wasn't vanity. It was purpose, the first stirring of a destiny too loud to silence. One afternoon, her uncle said, "Let's do it. Let's get you on the air." The trip to Knoxville was just a few hours, but to Dolly it felt like crossing worlds. She wore her best homemade dress, clutching a lunch her mama packed, hands trembling the whole ride. She was about to sing on the radio. At the WIVK station, the air smelled of dust and electricity. The microphone towered above her, a metal giant that could make a dream real. When she sang that day, the studio went silent, not because she was perfect, but because she was honest. Her voice had that rawness that can't be taught, a mountain echo wrapped in innocence. And when the song ended, someone behind the glass whispered, "That girl's got something." She didn't know it then, but that was the first time the world had said it out loud. Back home, her mother waited by the radio, static crackling through the room. When Dolly's voice filled the air, Avi Lee froze. It wasn't just pride. It was awe, the sound of her daughter's dream leaving the mountains. In that moment, the Partons understood something sacred. This wasn't a phase. It was calling. As the months passed, more invitations came. County fairs, small radio slots, church fundraisers. Dolly became a local wonder, a tiny girl with a voice too big for her frame. But for every moment of applause, there were whispers of doubt too. Neighbors said, "She's sweet, but girls like her don't make it out." Some called it ambition. Others called it foolishness. Yet Dolly didn't argue. She sang louder, because she'd already learned. When you're born with purpose, silence feels like death. Fame was still a faraway horizon. But even then, Dolly was rehearsing not just songs, she was rehearsing courage. She began writing her own music, scribbling lyrics on paper scraps and feed bags. Her early songs were simple, stories about family, God, and hope. But every line carried something no one could teach. Truth. That was her weapon, sincerity. Her Uncle Bill started sending demo tapes to producers in Nashville. Most never replied. Some sent polite refusals. But Dolly didn't flinch. Rejection didn't sting yet. It only fueled the fire. Because she still had a secret weapon. Innocence mixed with grit. She once said, "I didn't know enough to be scared. I just thought if I sing loud enough, somebody's gotta hear me." In 1956, she performed at the Cass Walker Farm and Home Hour, a local radio show that broadcast across East Tennessee. It was her biggest audience yet. She stepped onto the stage, clutching her guitar, staring into a crowd of farmers and families. The host smiled and said, "Let's give the little Parton girl a chance." When she opened her mouth, the noise of the crowd melted away. She didn't perform, she testified. Her voice wasn't just singing words. It was carving emotion out of the air. Even then, Dolly knew, songs aren't entertainment. They're confessions set to melody. That performance would change everything. Cass Walker saw her potential and offered her regular spots on his show. Soon, she became a local celebrity, people stopping her in town, calling her "that singing girl." To some, it was charming. To Dolly, it was proof that the dream was working. She wasn't imagining anymore, she was being heard. But fame, even in small doses, has its shadow. At home, her family still struggled. Money scarce, mouths to feed. Dolly's rising spotlight didn't change the realities of poverty. She'd perform in borrowed shoes and return to a cabin where the roof still leaked. That duality, being seen and still being poor, became her emotional classroom. It taught her that success doesn't erase hardship. It reframes it. Every cheer on the radio felt like a promise she'd made to her family. I'll make it big one day, and I'll make sure you never struggle again. That promise became the quiet fuel behind everything she did after. Late one night after a show, she sat outside under the stars, guitar on her lap. The crowd's applause still echoed in her ears. She whispered to herself, "One day I'll sing in Nashville." It wasn't a wish. It was a vow. From that moment, every note she sang, every mile she traveled, was a step toward that city. The radio had given her a glimpse of a wider world. Now she was ready to step inside it. When people heard her voice on air, they didn't just hear a girl. They heard possibility. A reminder that greatness can rise from the unlikeliest soil. For Dolly, those first radio days were more than opportunity. They were validation. Proof that her story was worth telling. Proof that the mountains had given the world something precious. And she carried that proof like armor. Through every performance, through every doubt, she held tight to that one undeniable truth. Her voice could travel farther than fear. Years later, when she stood on world stages and sold out arenas, she'd still say she could hear that first broadcast in her memory. The static, the tremble in her voice, the mountains listening from afar. That was the moment a dream became direction. The little girl who once sang to chickens had now sung to the world. But every dream demands a sacrifice. To chase hers, Dolly would have to leave behind the only home she'd ever known. Cabin, the hills, the echo that raised her. Because the radio had done its job, it had called her outward. Chapter 3. Leaving the hollow. Every dream comes with a door. And sometimes to walk through it, you have to leave everything you love standing behind it. For Dolly Parton, that door stood at the edge of the Smoky Mountains, a line between childhood and destiny. She could feel it long before she could name it. The songs were getting bigger, the radio applause louder. But so was the ache, because every note she sang was pulling her closer to something new, and further from home. By the time she turned 18, Dolly's voice had already traveled across Tennessee. She'd become the local girl who made it on the radio, the pride of Sevier County. But the cabin still stood the same cracked boards, the same scent of wood smoke and rain. Her brothers still shared one bed. Her mother still hummed over the fire. Nothing had changed except Dolly. She wanted more, not out of greed, but out of calling. She could feel the world humming beyond the hills, waiting for her to join its song. Her Uncle Bill had been sending demos to Nashville for months. And finally, the letter came. A producer was interested. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. That night, Dolly sat with her parents at the kitchen table. The fire flickered, painting their faces in gold and shadow. Her father stared at her hands, small, calloused, trembling. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. Dolly nodded. "Daddy, I've got to go." Her mother smiled through tears. "You've had that sound in you since the day you were born," she said. "The mountains can't hold it forever." There was no argument after that, because they all knew, even if she failed, she had to try. Leaving Sevier County was like tearing a piece of her heart out. The land wasn't just home, it was identity. The smell of pine, the rhythm of the river, the gospel echoes on Sunday mornings, it all lived inside her voice. But dreams don't ask for permission. They whisper, then they pull. At sunrise, she packed her guitar, a small suitcase, and every song she'd ever written. Her father loaded her things into the back of a rusty pickup truck. Her mother tucked a Bible into her hand. "Wherever you go," she said, "don't let them change what's good in you." Dolly smiled. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll be myself, rhinestones and all." They laughed. But the laughter couldn't hide the weight of the moment, because deep down they all knew she might never really come back the same. The drive to Nashville was long and silent. Mountains faded into rolling plains. The sky widened. The air changed. Dolly watched the landscape pass, her reflection in the window overlapping with fields of gold. She thought about the kids back home, about the songs she'd left half-finished, about her mother's voice fading in the distance. Every mile felt like a verse, one she didn't yet know how to end. But even through the sadness, there was fire in her chest, because she wasn't just running from something. She was running toward something greater. When she arrived in Nashville, it didn't look like the dream she'd imagined. The streets were crowded, the buildings loud and unforgiving. Nobody cared that she'd come from a one-room cabin or that her voice could move mountains. Here everyone could sing. Here talent was currency, and Dolly was just another girl trying to trade her dream for a chance. The first few days were rough. She stayed in a tiny rented room, sleeping with her guitar beside her like a friend. She'd walk to radio stations, record labels, and studios, asking for auditions. Most said no. Some didn't answer at all. But rejection didn't shake her. She'd been hardened by hills, not comfort. She knew how to work with little, how to sing through cold. The world could underestimate her, it had before, and every no she heard only sharpened her will. In the evenings, when the city lights flickered, she'd sit by the window and hum old mountain hymns. It was her way of keeping home close, like a compass that always pointed north. She realized that her past wasn't something to escape. It was something to carry. The hollow she left behind had shaped her, filled her lungs with air thick with meaning. And she decided she'd never sing like anyone else. She'd sing like the girl from Sevier County, because that truth, that authenticity, was her gold. Weeks turned into months. Small gigs came, local shows, studio sessions, demo singing for others. The pay was small, the room smoky, but the applause was real. And every time she walked off stage, she'd whisper to herself, "One step closer." Because that's how you build a dream, not in leaps, but in faith-filled inches. One night, after a performance in a small Nashville bar, an old producer approached her. He said, "You've got a sound that sticks. Don't change it." Dolly smiled. "Sir, I couldn't if I tried." That was the night she understood something powerful. She didn't come to Nashville to blend in. She came to stand out. Every piece of her, the accent, the laughter, the bold clothes, the sparkle, was part of her identity. And if people mocked it, that was fine. Because someday they'd pay to see it shine. Still at night, the loneliness crept in. Fame hadn't come yet. The city felt cold. She missed the smell of wood smoke, her mother's lullabies, the chorus of crickets under the stars. Sometimes she'd cry quietly, guitar in her lap, whispering prayers. "Lord, I hope I'm doing the right thing." And maybe heaven listened, because soon opportunities began to open. A studio wanted her to record a single. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a spark. That's all she ever needed. When she sang into that microphone, she wasn't just performing. She was thanking the mountains that made her. Every note carried dust from home. Every lyric carried faith. Leaving the hollow had hurt, but it had also freed her. Because sometimes you have to lose where you come from to understand what it gave you. Years later, she'd look back on that drive out of Sevier County and call it the hardest decision of her life. But she'd also say it was the one that defined her. "Leaving," she said once, "doesn't mean forgetting. It means growing." That's the truth of all great journeys. They demand both courage and heartbreak. Dolly Parton carried both in her suitcase. The girl who once sang to chickens had now stepped into the world. Uncertain, unpolished, but unbreakable. And the world was about to take notice. But dreams are never granted easily. The road to fame would test every ounce of her resolve. Chapter 4. The struggle years. Every dreamer faces a season of silence, that long stretch between almost and arrival. For Dolly Parton, that silence was called Nashville. She had come with a suitcase full of songs, a smile that could melt cynicism, and a voice carved by the hills. But the city didn't care. It was crowded with talent, lined with hungry hearts who could all sing, write, and dream. Here, kindness didn't open doors. Persistence did. Her first months in Nashville were harder than she'd imagined. She worked small gigs at local bars and backup sessions for other singers. The pay barely covered rent. The applause, when it came, was polite, never thunderous. And worse, there was the condescension. Producers looked at her and saw only a pretty face, a heavy accent, a girl from the mountains. They told her to tone down her twang, to dress more serious, to sing something less country. She'd smile and nod, then ignore every word. Because Dolly Parton wasn't here to blend in. She was here to shine. Still, loneliness is a heavy weight. There were nights when she'd walk down Lower Broadway, watching neon lights flicker over faces chasing the same impossible dream. She'd wonder if she'd made a mistake, if she'd left home just to become another voice lost in the static. But doubt, like every storm, passed when she sang. Her voice was her shelter, her proof that she was meant for something bigger. Each song she wrote became a confession, a way of turning fear into melody. She'd hum while washing dishes, while counting pennies, while staring out of her window at a city that hadn't yet seen her worth. That's the thing about vision. No one sees it until it's real. And sometimes not even you do. In those early years, Dolly recorded demo tapes. Simple, unpolished, but full of heart. Her Uncle Bill helped her hustle them across town, dropping them off at studios, hoping someone would listen. Most didn't. But one producer finally did. His name was Fred Foster of Monument Records. He saw past the accent, past the curls. He heard a voice that couldn't be mistaken for anyone else. He signed her. But like all beginnings, it came with conditions. They told her to sing pop music. The label didn't believe a female country artist could break through. They wanted something modern, something that could sell. Dolly tried. She recorded songs that didn't sound like her. Polished, radio-friendly, forgettable. Each one flopped. Each failure felt like wearing someone else's skin. But behind every rejection was a revelation. She learned that imitation might buy attention, but only authenticity earns respect. So she fought for her sound, for her roots. When the label resisted, she told them, "If I can't sing what's real to me, I might as well go home." It was a risk, but faith doesn't bargain with fear. Then, in 1967, the tide began to turn. She released Dumb Blonde, a cheeky, defiant song that told the world not to mistake her looks for weakness. Climbed the country charts, landing in the top 20. The lyrics were a declaration. Just because I'm blonde, don't think I'm dumb. For the first time, Dolly's true self broke through. Witty, sharp, unashamed. People noticed. And so did a man named Porter Wagoner, one of the biggest stars in country television. He invited her to join the Porter Wagoner show. It was national exposure, the golden ticket every singer dreamed of. But before fame could crown her, struggle had to finish its work. The years before that moment had hardened her in quiet ways. She'd learned to walk through rejection with grace, to keep smiling when doors closed, to keep writing when no one cared to listen. She'd learned that ambition without humility becomes arrogance, and humility without ambition becomes surrender. Balance was her lesson, and persistence her prayer. Every small gig, every half-empty room, every whispered doubt from men in suits, all of it forged the steel behind her glitter. Because behind every rhinestone is iron. She once said, "If you want the rainbow, you've got to put up with the rain." Those words weren't poetry. They were survival. Nashville had taught her that talent might open a door, but character keeps it open. And Dolly's character was carved from firewood and faith. There were times she almost packed up and went home. But every time she looked at her guitar, she'd remember her mother's voice. Don't let them change what's good in you. That memory became her compass. One night, sitting alone in her room, she wrote a song about her journey, about leaving home, about the fear and the faith. It was never released, but she kept the lyrics tucked in her notebook. It read, "The road is long and my feet are tired, but the fire I carry won't go out." That line, more than any chart hit, captured who Dolly Parton was in those struggle years, a flicker of hope walking through the dark. By the time the Porter Wagoner show came calling, she was ready, not just as a singer, but as a woman who knew her worth. The years of rejection had stripped her of fear, not faith. She had learned to wait, not passively but purposefully, to grow roots while the world was blind to her bloom. Because sometimes the struggle isn't punishment, it's preparation. Every no she heard had been sharpening her yes. Every empty audience had been training her for the ones that would fill arenas. Every lonely night had been teaching her how to sing with soul instead of ego. The struggle wasn't breaking her, it was building her. In Nashville, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. You can't chase fame. You can only become someone worth finding. And Dolly Parton, the girl from the mountains, was about to be found. Because after the struggle came the breakthrough. After the silence came the song that would change everything. Chapter 5. The First Record. Every dreamer remembers the sound of their first yes. For Dolly Parton, it came wrapped in microphone cords and studio smoke. The day she stepped into Monument Records and the world finally began to listen. She was 20, small in stature, but her confidence filled the room like sunlight through a church window. Her voice wasn't the polished pop Nashville was selling. It was raw honey with a razor's edge. Sweet enough to charm you, sharp enough to cut through the noise. And that was exactly what the industry didn't know it needed. Fred Foster, the man who'd given her that first contract, stood in the booth watching. He believed in her, but he still wanted something that could fit the market. Pop was selling, country was fading, so they dressed her sound in radio gloss, bright horns, snappy choruses, trying to make her a bubblegum star. She didn't fight it, not yet, because she understood. Sometimes you have to play the game before you can change it. The song was called Puppy Love. A simple tune about young affection, light, harmless, forgettable to most. But to Dolly it was sacred, 'cause it was hers, her first record, her name pressed into vinyl. She held that record like a newborn, a dream finally solid enough to touch. But success didn't follow immediately. The song barely brushed the charts. Critics ignored it. Nashville shrugged. For most it was nothing. For Dolly, it was everything. She didn't cry when it failed. She studied. She replayed the track, hearing where the truth had been buried under compromise. She realized that to be heard, she couldn't just sing well. She had to sing honestly. That lesson would guide every song that followed. Still, even small progress mattered. Each studio session taught her something about control. A voice, of tone, of self. She learned how to hold a microphone like it was alive, how to bend a lyric until it bent hearts. And more importantly, she learned patience. Because greatness is rarely a lightning strike. It's a slow burn. And Dolly was kindling herself from the inside out. Her life outside the studio was still far from glamorous. She lived in a cramped apartment with creaking floors, making meals from pennies and prayers. But she had her guitar, her notebook, and her conviction. Each morning she'd walk past posters of big stars on Music Row, their smiles perfect, their hair immaculate, and she'd whisper under her breath, "One day I'll be up there too. But I'll still look like me." Because even then, Dolly knew authenticity was her superpower, and she'd protect it like treasure. The small spark of puppy love opened more doors. She was invited to sing background vocals for other artists. Small, anonymous parts that filled other people's dreams. But while they were chasing fame, she was learning its language. Studio engineers noticed her work ethic. Writers noticed her lyrics. And soon, her phone began to ring with new offers. Collaborations, duets, co-writes. She was no longer invisible. She was inevitable. Still, she wanted something that was fully hers, a sound no one could mislabel as pop or novelty. She began sneaking her own country songs into studio rehearsals, playing them between takes. Ballads about heartbreak and home, written in her mountain drawl. At first, the producers laughed. Too tiny, too simple, too hillbilly. Dolly smiled, because she'd heard that before, and she knew exactly what that meant. They didn't understand her yet. She wasn't going to leave her roots at the door to be accepted. She'd open the door wider until the roots grew through it. Then one day she received an invitation that changed everything. Porter Wagoner, the man she'd grown up listening to, wanted her to appear on his television show. It wasn't superstardom yet, but it was the first real stage where the country could meet her. He'd seen her on a radio broadcast and said, "That girl's got gold in her throat." Dolly knew what this meant. It was the beginning of the long road out of anonymity. But it was also a test, because Porter Wagoner's shadow was enormous, and stepping into it would be both a blessing and a challenge. She was about to learn that being discovered is one thing, being recognized is another. Before that moment, she visited her parents back home. She wanted to show them the record, proof that the dream was real. Her father held it like something fragile. He couldn't read the words on the label, but he traced her name with his calloused thumb. Avi Lee cried softly, whispering, "You did it, baby. You really did." That visit grounded her. It reminded her that success wasn't the stage. It was the story. And her story had only just begun. Back in Nashville, she prepared for the next phase. The first record hadn't made her famous, but it had made her ready. She'd proven to herself that she could survive rejection, navigate the studio world, and keep her voice intact. Now she was entering a new arena: television, fame, partnership, and the paradox of opportunity. Being seen but not fully heard. Because for every door that opens, another test waits behind it. The next chapter of her life would bring applause and resistance in equal measure. But the girl who came from the mountains had already faced worse: cold nights, hunger, doubt. She could handle critics and contracts. When she placed that first record on her turntable, she listened not for perfection, but for proof. And she heard it, the faint echo of every dream that had carried her there. Cabin, a church, radio, the struggle, all of it was pressed into that piece of vinyl. Her past wasn't gone. It was playing back to her, spinning at 45 revolutions per minute, the sound of faith made real. It wasn't a hit. It wasn't a masterpiece. But it was hers. And that was enough. Because the girl who once sang to the mountains had finally heard her own echo coming back. But her greatest test was still ahead. Fame itself. The spotlight that could either crown her or consume her. Chapter 6. The Wagoner Years. By the late 1960s, Nashville was spinning with change. New stars, new sounds, and new faces trying to outshine the rest. But one name had already carved itself into every radio in America: Porter Wagoner. He was the rhinestone cowboy of television. Flashy suits, bigger hair, and a bigger voice. Every week, millions tuned in to the Porter Wagoner Show, a gospel-tinged variety hour that made country music feel like family again. And soon, that family was about to gain one unforgettable daughter, a girl from Sevier County with a voice made of truth. When Porter first heard Dolly sing, it wasn't on a grand stage. It was on a humble recording passed through friends. He listened once, then again. There was something in that sound, the ache of the mountains mixed with the sparkle of modern Nashville. He knew it instantly, she had it. So he sent for her. Dolly, barely in her 20s, arrived at the studio wearing a handmade dress and a nervous smile. Porter extended his hand, grinning beneath his golden hair. "Well, little lady," he said, "you're about to be on television every Saturday night." Dolly's heart skipped a beat. For years she'd dreamed of being heard beyond Tennessee. Now she was about to be seen. Her debut on the Porter Wagoner show aired in 1967. Millions of Americans watched as the camera panned to a young woman in a pastel dress, her blonde hair shimmering under the lights. She smiled, took a breath, and sang, clear, tender, unshakable. By the time the last note hung in the air, the audience was on its feet. A new star had arrived. That night, letters poured into the studio, fans wanting to know who the new girl was. And just like that, the Mountain Girl became a household name. But fame, as Dolly soon learned, always comes with fine print. Porter Wagoner was not just her duet partner. He was her mentor, boss, and gatekeeper. Their chemistry on stage was undeniable, but behind the scenes, tension brewed. Porter wanted her to stay in the role of his protégé. Sweet, supportive, secondary. Dolly wanted to grow, to write, to lead. Their partnership was powerful but combustible. They toured constantly, shared the spotlight, and recorded hit after hit. The last thing on my mind. Holding on to nothing. Just someone I used to know. Together, they became the golden duo of country television. But every harmony has its dissonance. Dolly's songwriting began to flourish. She was no longer just the girl with a pretty voice. She was the pen behind the songs that made hearts break. Fans adored her, and record executives started whispering about solo deals. Porter didn't like the whispers. He saw her rising star as both pride and threat. He'd taken her under his wing, but she was beginning to outshine him, something Nashville rarely forgave, especially from a woman. Dolly never confronted him with anger. She fought with kindness, with relentless professionalism. She understood something profound. You can win a war without ever raising your voice. Still, the strain grew. Late nights on the road, creative disagreements, the constant tug between gratitude and independence. Dolly loved Porter, but she couldn't live in his shadow forever. Despite the tension, those years shaped her into the artist she'd always dreamed of becoming. Porter taught her the machinery of show business, how to engage a crowd, how to demand stage presence, how to charm even the toughest producers. She absorbed it all like oxygen, but she also learned what she didn't want, control disguised as care. In interviews years later, she'd say, "He saw something in me before the world did. I'll always be grateful for that." But sometimes, gratitude has to make room for growth. It was a lesson she'd carry for life. In those years, Dolly's career soared. She began winning awards, writing songs that climbed charts, and cultivating a style entirely her own, equal parts Appalachian honesty and Hollywood sparkle. Audiences adored her humor, her humility, her heart. She became a symbol of something rare, a woman who could be strong without bitterness, funny without apology, glamorous without losing her soul. But success didn't make things easier between her and Porter. In fact, it made the goodbye inevitable. The story of their parting would later become one of the most poetic exits in music history. But before that farewell, there were long, silent car rides, arguments about set lists, moments of laughter that couldn't mask the growing distance. Dolly could feel the storm coming. She knew it would hurt, but she also knew it was time. One night after a show, she told Porter, "I think I need to go out on my own." He stared at her for a long time. Finally, he said, "You'll regret it." She smiled softly. "Maybe. But I have to find out." That conversation ended a partnership that had given her everything, and cost her just as much. Before leaving, Dolly wanted to say goodbye the only way she knew how, through song. She went home, sat at her piano, and poured her gratitude, her grief, and her goodbye into melody. The song she wrote was simple, sincere, and eternal. It began with a whisper. If I should stay, I would only be in your way. That song would become one of the most beloved farewells in music history. I will always love you. It was her thank you and her freedom, a goodbye without bitterness, a closure without cruelty. When Porter heard it, he cried. Then he hugged her and said, "You can go, but that's the best song you've ever written." Her years with Porter Wagoner had been a crucible, fire that refined her, not destroyed her. He gave her exposure, mentorship, and an audience. She gave him legacy. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was human. And from it, Dolly learned one of the hardest truths of success. Sometimes you have to outgrow your teachers, not out of pride but out of purpose. She had entered the Porter Wagoner show as a small-town dreamer. She left it as a woman ready to build an empire. The glitter of television had taught her how to perform. The friction had taught her how to endure. The friendship had taught her how to forgive. And the song she wrote to mark the end of that chapter would follow her for the rest of her life. A bridge between humility and independence. I Will Always Love You wasn't just a ballad. It was her graduation anthem. Because after the Wagoner years, Dolly Parton wasn't just a singer anymore. She was an artist, one the world could never again ignore. Every mentor leaves a mark. Every bond leaves a bruise. But what we take from those chapters defines who we become next. For Dolly, the end of the Wagoner years wasn't a loss. It was liberation. And from that freedom came the song that would change the world forever. Chapter 7. I Will Always Love You. Goodbyes are the hardest songs to write. Because every note is half memory, half mourning. When Dolly Parton sat down at her piano in 1973, she wasn't trying to write a hit. She was trying to say what her heart couldn't. The partnership that had built her fame, the Porter Wagoner show, was ending. But she didn't want it to end in bitterness. She wanted it to end in truth. That night, she closed the door to her small Nashville office, dimmed the lights, and began to play. Her fingers found a melody that felt like forgiveness. Then she whispered the first words that came to her mind. If I should stay, I would only be in your way. The line hit her like lightning. It wasn't just a lyric, it was release. In those few words lived every emotion she'd carried. Gratitude, pain, pride, and love. By dawn, the song was complete. No overthinking, no edits, came through her, not from her. She called it, I Will Always Love You. The next day, she walked into Porter's office. He was at his desk, half grinning, half guarded. They hadn't spoken much since the announcement. The air between them was full of words unsaid. Porter, she said softly, I wrote something for you. He leaned back, skeptical but curious. She sat at the piano and began to play. Her voice was steady, fragile, pure, the kind of sound that makes time stop. By the time she finished, Porter's eyes were wet. He stood in silence, then said, You can go, Dolly. That's the best song you've ever written. And with that, the door between them closed, gently, gracefully, permanently. A few weeks later, Dolly recorded the song in the RCA Studio B in Nashville. The engineers dimmed the lights. The air felt sacred. It wasn't just another track. It was an ending etched in sound. When she sang the final chorus, no one in the room breathed. The tape finished rolling, and Fred Foster whispered, That's a once-in-a-lifetime take. They all knew it. They just witnessed something eternal. When the single was released in 1974, it climbed the country charts straight to #1. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet strength wrapped in melody. Listeners felt something deeper than heartbreak. They felt healing. Because Dolly's voice didn't just say goodbye. Blessed it. Every line carried grace instead of resentment. Every note forgave what words could not. And that became the secret to its power. Love without possession, farewell without anger. Porter and Dolly's professional split could have been a scandal. Instead, it became a masterclass in dignity. While others argued in tabloids, she turned pain into poetry. That song, simple, unadorned, became her passport to timelessness. Years later, Elvis Presley's manager called her. Elvis wanted to record it. For most artists, that was the dream of dreams. But there was a catch. They wanted half of her publishing rights, half of the song's ownership, half of her soul. Dolly smiled kindly and said, "I love Elvis, but I can't give away my songs." She turned him down. People called her crazy. But that decision, that courage to own her voice, would one day make her one of the most successful songwriters in history. It was proof that sometimes saying no is the highest form of self-respect. "I Will Always Love You" became her signature song. It charted again when she re-recorded it in 1982 for the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And then, decades later, it exploded into eternity when Whitney Houston's version lit up the world. Millions who had never heard of Dolly Parton suddenly discovered her words, and through Whitney's voice, her spirit. When Whitney's rendition became one of the best-selling singles of all time, Dolly smiled and said, "It was like hearing my song again for the first time, but dressed in heaven." She never once felt jealousy, only pride, because she understood what most artists forget. If a song truly belongs to the world, you must let it go. The song's journey mirrored her own, from small beginnings to worldwide resonance. It had started as a goodbye between two people. It became a universal anthem for every farewell, every gentle ending, every love that didn't die, only transformed. Dolly didn't just write music. She wrote emotional truth, stripped of ego, wrapped in melody. And that's why her songs endure. 'Cause they don't tell you what to feel. They remind you of what you already do. Years later, when Porter Wagoner fell ill, Dolly visited him in the hospital. She held his hand, looked into his fading eyes, and said, "I want you to know, I will always love you." He smiled weakly and replied, "I know you will, Dolly." The circle closed exactly where it began, in music, in mutual respect, in forgiveness. He passed away in 2007, and when Dolly performed that song again at his memorial, her voice trembled with gratitude, not grief, because some farewells never truly end, they just change key. "I Will Always Love You" wasn't written for charts or trophies. It was written for peace, for the moment when love chooses freedom over fear. It taught the world what Dolly had always known, that kindness is not weakness, that strength can wear sequins, and that goodbyes, when spoken with grace, can echo forever. The song became her mirror, reflecting who she was at her core, a woman who could rise above pride, stay true to her soul, and still smile through the ache. From that moment on, Dolly Parton stopped chasing approval. She didn't need the world's validation, she had found her own. She'd turned heartbreak into harmony, loss into legacy. And as she stepped onto her next stage, alone but fearless, she carried with her the melody that had freed her, a promise of love, unbroken and eternal. Because the greatest songs aren't written, they're lived. And this one would live forever. She had closed the chapter on Porter Wagoner, but her true story was only beginning. For the first time, Dolly was fully in control of her music, her image, and her destiny. The world was about to see what she could do, not as a partner but as a powerhouse. Because from the ashes of goodbye rose the fire of independence. Chapter 8. Jolene. Every artist has that one song, the one that captures lightning, the one that becomes bigger than fame itself. For Dolly Parton, that song was Jolene. But to understand Jolene, you have to understand what it means to turn insecurity into art. Because behind that melody of seduction and pleading lies a story not of rivalry, but of transformation. The story began on an ordinary day in Nashville. Dolly was newly married to Carl Dean, the quiet, grounded man who preferred small talk and solitude over spotlight. While on tour, she'd met thousands of fans, but one in particular stood out. A young red-haired bank teller who smiled a little too brightly every time Carl came in to deposit a check. Dolly laughed about it later, but in the moment, she felt something strange. A flicker of jealousy, a moment of doubt. It wasn't that she didn't trust her husband. It was that she saw in that girl something she recognized. Youth, beauty, and the power of attention. So instead of fighting it, she did what all great artists do. She wrote it down. One night, she sat on her bed with her guitar and began to play. The chords came first, hypnotic, circular, like a spell you couldn't break. Then the name slipped out, as if whispered by the muse herself. Jolene, 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 Jolene. The repetition wasn't planned. It was instinct, a chant, a confession, a plea. And by the time the last verse fell into place, Dolly had done it again. She'd taken a moment of insecurity and turned it into immortality. The next morning, she played it for Carl. He grinned and said, "You know, I'm not sure whether to be flattered or scared." Dolly just laughed, because she knew the song had a life of its own. Jolene wasn't written to shame or accuse. It was written to humanize, to turn jealousy into empathy. Because in the song, Dolly doesn't curse Jolene. She begs her. She says, "Please don't take him just because you can." It's not anger, it's vulnerability. And that's why it resonated, because every listener has been both Dolly and Jolene at some point in their lives. When Dolly recorded Jolene in 1973, she didn't dress it up. No big orchestra, no studio glitter, just voice, guitar, and the pulse of honesty. The engineers in RCA Studio B knew instantly that something electric had happened. After the first take, one whispered, "That's it." Because sometimes the first take isn't rehearsal, it's revelation. When the song hit the airwaves in 1974, it spread like wildfire. Radio DJs couldn't stop playing it. Women called in to say, "That song is my story." Men admired it for its simplicity and strength. And suddenly, Dolly Parton wasn't just a country singer. She was a cultural voice, the sound of feminine honesty in a world that often silenced it. Jolene climbed to #1 on the country charts, then crossed borders, languages, generations. Its name became a synonym for temptation itself. But beneath the fame and the fascination was a truth only Dolly understood. She hadn't written a song about losing. She'd written a song about understanding. Years later, she told audiences that Jolene was really a song about power, about what happens when you face what scares you and sing anyway. In her own words, "I could have fought her or ignored it, but writing that song gave me control over it." That's the magic of art. It turns the things that haunt you into things that heal you. And in doing so, Dolly had captured something universal, the soft strength of forgiveness. Jolene became her passport to the world. It reached the UK, Australia, and beyond. And decades later, it would be covered by hundreds of artists, from rock legends to indie singers to entire choirs. But none could match the trembling sincerity of that original recording. Because Dolly didn't just sing Jolene, she became her. For 3 minutes, she embodied every woman who had ever feared losing love. And in doing so, she gave them all a voice. What makes the song timeless isn't its melody, it's its mercy. Even at her most vulnerable, Dolly never blames. She never shouts. She simply asks. It's the sound of strength cloaked in gentleness, a theme that would define her entire career. Because Dolly Parton's power was never about dominance. It was about dignity. When she performed Jolene live for the first time, she could feel the audience breathe with her. They sang every word back, eyes shining, hearts open. That was the night she realized she had crossed from fame into folklore. And yet, she remained humble, cracking jokes between verses, laughing at herself. She knew that fame was fickle, but truth was eternal. Over time, Jolene became more than a song. It became a lesson that beauty and insecurity can coexist, that strength can sound like surrender, and that storytelling is the bridge between pain and peace. It also marked the beginning of a creative streak that would redefine country music. Because after Jolene, Dolly didn't just write hits. She wrote revelations. Her pen became her power, one that no label, no producer, no man could ever control again. Looking back, she would often smile when asked if Jolene was real. She'd nod and say, "Oh, she was real. But I thank her. Without her, I might never have written that song." That's Dolly's genius, turning rivals into reasons, turning moments of fear into milestones. Because when you can thank the things that once hurt you, you've already won. Jolene wasn't just a hit. It was a declaration that Dolly Parton was no longer the girl from Porter Wagoner's show. She was a storyteller, a composer, a woman in full command of her art. The song opened a new era for her, one where vulnerability became strength and truth became her trademark. From a whisper of jealousy came a global anthem. From a fleeting fear came forever. And that, more than fame or fortune, became her legacy, the power to transform emotion into empathy. Because in the end, Jolene wasn't about losing love. It was about loving yourself enough to let go of fear. And fear, as Dolly was about to prove, was no match for a woman with a song. Chapter 9. Hollywood Calls. By the mid-1970s, Dolly Parton was no longer just a voice on the radio. She was a force of nature. Jolene had made her a household name, and I Will Always Love You had proven her genius as a songwriter. But fame has a way of whispering, "What's next?" For Dolly, the answer came from a direction few expected. Hollywood. Los Angeles. A city built on reinvention, where dreams shimmer like gold dust in the air. It was the farthest thing from the Smoky Mountains, all neon noise and endless faces promising opportunity. When Dolly first stepped onto a Hollywood set, she felt both awe and curiosity. She'd been invited to guest on talk shows and variety programs, her humor and charisma lighting up every stage she walked onto. Audiences who'd never listened to country music suddenly adored her wit, her laughter, and her honesty. They weren't just listening to a singer. They were falling in love with a personality. Hollywood loved glamour, and Dolly understood that better than anyone. But she played by her own rules. While others toned down their image to fit in, she turned the dial up. The hair got bigger, the heels got higher, the jokes got sharper. People underestimated her. They always had, mistaking her sparkle for simplicity. But that was part of her brilliance. She once said, "It takes a lot of money to look this cheap." It was humor with a blade, a reminder that she was in on the joke, always one step ahead. Behind the laughter stood a businesswoman who knew exactly what she was doing. In 1977, Dolly released Here You Come Again, her first true crossover hit. It broke through to the pop charts, soaring across radio waves from Nashville to New York. Critics called it country pop. Dolly called it freedom. It was proof that she could transcend genre without losing herself. Every song carried the same honesty that had once echoed through a mountain cabin. Only now, the whole world could hear it. The album went platinum. The Grammys called. Hollywood noticed. Soon, producers were lining up with film offers. Her first major acting role would come in 1980 with a workplace comedy called 9 to 5. The script was sharp, feminist, and funny, a story about three women standing up to their chauvinistic boss. It was risky for its time, and it was perfect for her. The director asked if she'd be comfortable acting alongside Hollywood stars Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. Dolly smiled and said, "Honey, I've been acting all my life. You think this hair is natural?" Everyone laughed. But when the cameras rolled, the laughter turned to awe. Because Dolly wasn't acting. She was being. Authentic, warm, magnetic. Every line she delivered felt real because it was real. The southern wisdom of someone who'd lived everything she said. The film became a box office sensation. It wasn't just funny, it was revolutionary. For the first time, audiences saw women in charge, rewriting the rules of workplace power. And the theme song, written and performed by Dolly herself, became an anthem for an entire generation. Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. It was catchy, clever, and empowering. But underneath its humor was truth. The grind, the struggle, the quiet strength of ordinary women. The song shot to #1 across pop and country charts, earning Dolly another Grammy and solidifying her as something America hadn't seen before, a genuine cultural icon. Hollywood didn't know what to do with someone like her. She wasn't jaded or cynical. She didn't drink the fame. She managed it. While others lost themselves in glitter, Dolly used it as armor. Reporters tried to corner her with gossip or controversy. She laughed every time, deflecting with grace. "I'm not offended by dumb blonde jokes," she said once, "because I know I'm not dumb. And I also know I'm not blonde." It was classic Dolly, humor laced with truth, a survival strategy wrapped in rhinestones. But fame at that level comes with a price. For the first time, she felt the strain of living between two worlds, Nashville's sincerity and Hollywood's spectacle. She missed home, the quiet mornings, the sound of the mountains breathing. But she also knew she'd earned this moment. Every camera flash, every stage light, every round of applause. Behind the scenes, she remained grounded. She called her family daily, kept her Tennessee manners, and refused to trade warmth for status. While Hollywood sold illusions, Dolly sold honesty. Her success in film opened doors for new ventures. She began writing for soundtracks, mentoring younger artists, and investing her wealth into causes she believed in. But most importantly, she stayed in control of her image, her music, and her message. That independence became her trademark. She wasn't a product of Hollywood. She was a visitor who learned its language and rewrote it in her accent. When asked how she managed to thrive without losing herself, she replied, "I'm the same person I was back home. I just have more mirrors now." That sentence captured the secret of her longevity. Hollywood changes people who want to belong. But Dolly never wanted to belong. She wanted to be herself, louder. Her humor, her faith, her kindness, those were her roots. No amount of spotlight could burn them away. By the end of the decade, Dolly Parton had achieved what few artists ever do. She conquered two industries at once, music and film, without surrendering her soul. And though the cameras adored her, what truly made her unforgettable was something deeper. She didn't act for fame. She lived for connection. Every laugh she shared, every song she wrote, every story she told, all of it was a bridge back to the people who'd believed in her from the beginning. Hollywood may have discovered her, but the mountains had made her. As the lights of Los Angeles sparkled below her hotel window, Dolly would often sit with her guitar and hum. She wasn't chasing stardom anymore. She was shaping legacy, because to her, success was never about escape. It was about expansion, bringing the heart of Tennessee into every corner of the world. And the world, in turn, was falling in love with the woman who made sincerity look like stardom. But her story was far from over, because soon she would discover that the brightest lights don't come from Hollywood. They come from giving back. Chapter 10, 9 to 5. The 1980s opened with a bang, not from drums or guitars, but from the sound of women finally being heard. America was changing. The workplace, long ruled by men in gray suits, was beginning to feel the tremor of something new, equality knocking on the door. And right in the middle of it stood Dolly Parton, smiling, sparkling, and armed with a song that would become the anthem of an era. When Dolly was cast in the movie 9 to 5, most people thought it was a novelty, a country singer trying her hand at comedy. But what they didn't realize was that Dolly had been preparing for this role her entire life. The film told the story of three women who rise up against their sexist boss, a sharp, funny, and fearless take on gender politics wrapped in laughter. Dolly played Doralee Rhodes, a secretary with big hair, a bigger heart, and an even bigger sense of justice. She saw herself in Doralee, a woman underestimated, judged for her looks, but driven by something no one could measure: integrity. On the first day of filming, Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin watched as Dolly walked onto the set, radiant, polite, and instantly commanding. She had never acted in a film before, but the moment the cameras rolled, something magical happened. She was natural, funny, and completely unafraid. Every take felt alive. When the director yelled, "Cut!" the crew would often keep laughing long after the scene ended. It wasn't performance, it was presence. And then came the song. During breaks between scenes, Dolly sat in her trailer, tapping her long acrylic nails against a coffee cup. Each tap sounded like a typewriter key. Blick, black, blick. The rhythm of working women everywhere. She laughed to herself and began humming a melody over it. Within hours, the hook was born. Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. She wrote the song on set, inspired by the real-life struggles of women she'd known all her life, from her mother's hard labor to her fans' daily grind. By the time the film wrapped, the song was finished. It wasn't just a soundtrack, it was a statement. When 9 to 5 hit theaters in December 1980, it exploded. Audiences roared with laughter, tears, and recognition. Women saw themselves on screen, not as victims but as victors. And the song, it became a revolution with a melody. Every radio station in America played it. Every woman who had ever felt unseen hummed it under her breath while clocking in. It was catchy, yes, but it was also cathartic. "It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it," she sang. And every listener smiled because finally someone understood. The song soared to #1 on both the pop and country charts, earning Dolly 2 Grammy Awards and an Oscar nomination. But beyond the trophies, it gave her something far more valuable: cultural impact. She wasn't just singing to entertain anymore. She was singing to empower. 9 to 5 became a unifying cry for equality, a bridge between genders, classes, and generations. It was proof that you could make people dance and make them think. For Dolly, the success of 9 to 5 was both thrilling and grounding. She'd crossed from Nashville to Hollywood, from music to film, and now she'd conquered both. But she never forgot the people the song was written for. She said later, "I wrote it for everyone who's ever worked hard and been overlooked. That's not just women, that's the human condition." That humility kept her grounded when fame could have carried her away. While others chased status, she chased meaning. Behind the glamour, the film had also deepened Dolly's understanding of her own power. She realized she could use her platform to shape conversation, to blend entertainment with education. So she began speaking more openly about equality, kindness, and opportunity, always with humor, always with warmth. To say, "I don't march in the streets, but I'll sing you to freedom if that's what it takes." And somehow, through melody alone, she did. The film's success brought Dolly more fame than ever. Hollywood parties, talk shows, endless interviews. But beneath the surface, she was already planning something more permanent than fame, a way to give back, to build rather than just perform. Because for Dolly, success was never the end goal. It was a tool, a means to do good. That desire, that calling, would soon lead her home again. Back in Tennessee, she watched the film's premiere on television with her family. They laughed, sang along, and cheered when her name appeared on screen. Her father, usually a man of few words, said quietly, "That's my girl." To Dolly, that meant more than any award. Because she hadn't just made it to Hollywood. She'd brought her roots with her, and made the whole world listen to them. The legacy of 9 to 5 would outlive its decade. Decades later, it would become a Broadway musical, a rallying cry at protests, a slogan on t-shirts and coffee mugs. It would echo through time, reminding every listener that laughter can be a weapon, and melody can be a movement. And at the center of it all was Dolly, the woman who had once sung for chickens in a cabin, now singing for millions with the same unshakable sincerity. 9 to 5 wasn't just a hit. It was a mirror held up to society, one that reflected struggle, strength, and solidarity. It proved that you could fight for change without losing joy, that you could be funny and fierce at once, that you could be dazzling and deep, all in the same breath. And that's the paradox of Dolly Parton, a woman who could wear sequins and speak truth, who could make you laugh while teaching you to rise. Because real power doesn't shout, sings. Chapter 11. The Rhinestone Revolution. If you had to capture Dolly Parton's spirit in one image, it wouldn't be a microphone or a gold record. It would be a rhinestone, small, bright, and made to shine no matter where it's placed. Because to understand Dolly's revolution, you have to understand her greatest act of rebellion. She turned glitter into power. In an era where women in country music were told to be modest, Dolly was audacious. While others dressed down to be taken seriously, she doubled down on herself. Bigger hair, louder colors, more sparkle, more laughter. Critics sneered, calling her image excessive. But Dolly knew exactly what she was doing. Every rhinestone on her outfit was a piece of armor, a defense against a world that underestimated her. "I'm not trying to look cheap," she once said. "I'm trying to look expensive in my own way." That statement was more than humor. It was philosophy. Growing up in poverty, Dolly had watched her mother mend clothes with whatever scraps were available. Ribbons, buttons, fabric from old flour sacks. Those early lessons in creativity shaped her sense of style. She learned that beauty wasn't about money. It was about imagination. So when success arrived, she didn't tone herself down to fit in. She amplified herself. The country girl turned cosmic. Each sequin told a story of survival, of self-worth, of a woman refusing to be small. By the early 1980s, Dolly's look was iconic. The wigs, the lashes, the glittering dresses, they weren't costume. They were identity. Every appearance on stage became an act of celebration. Every interview, a balancing act between humor and honesty. Reporters would ask, "Don't you think people focus too much on how you look?" She'd smile and say, "Sure they do. But while they're looking, I'm talking. And they're listening." That was her secret weapon. Disarm with charm, then teach through laughter. The Rhinestone Revolution wasn't just about fashion. It was about freedom. In a male-dominated industry, Dolly refused to let anyone define her femininity as weakness. She used it as leverage, a language men couldn't control. Her image wasn't submission. It was strategy. When executives tried to dress her differently or change her style, she refused. She told them, "You hired me for being me, so let me stay that way." And they did, because she was selling out stadiums, crossing over into pop charts, and building an empire from sparkle alone. Her stage persona became a mirror for her audience. She gave permission for others to be bold, to be bright, to be unapologetically themselves. Fans who had once hidden behind conformity began to find confidence in her courage. Men admired her wit. Women adored her resilience. And drag performers, decades before mainstream acceptance, found in her a patron saint of flamboyant authenticity. She'd often say, "I've always been comfortable with the outrageous, because it lets other people feel normal." That's how revolutions start. Quietly, through permission. Behind the rhinestones was a mind of steel. Dolly was no puppet of the industry. She was its quiet architect. She negotiated her own publishing rights, managed her image licensing, and built a business empire before anyone realized what she was doing. Every glittering outfit on stage was funded by strategy. Every punchline masked precision. She once said, "I may look fake, but I'm real where it counts." And that became the thesis of her legacy. Appearance as metaphor, art as armor. The world didn't always understand her, but they couldn't look away. And that was enough. As her fame grew, Dolly turned her image into a message. That self-expression is not vanity. It's survival. She knew that girls growing up in small towns were watching. She knew that every sparkle on her gown whispered, "You can be different and still shine." That message would echo through generations, across music, culture, and identity. But behind the laughter and rhinestones, there were lonely nights too. The spotlight is warm, but it burns. The crowds cheered, but they couldn't always see the woman underneath. Fame is heavy, even when it's beautiful. And Dolly, for all her light, carried it alone. In her journal from that period, she wrote, "Sometimes I feel like a butterfly trapped inside my own glitter." Yet even then, she never let pain define her. She polished it, turned it, and let it sparkle, because that's what she did with everything life gave her. By the mid-1980s, Dolly was no longer a country singer. She was a phenomenon. She was on talk shows, in films, on magazine covers, even performing with pop stars and rock icons. But through all of it, she never forgot her origin. When asked what her style represented, she said, "It's who I would have been if I could have afforded it sooner." That line made people laugh, but it also made them think. Because behind every joke was a truth about class, ambition, and the right to dream loudly. The Rhinestone Revolution was never about fashion. It was a declaration that self-made doesn't mean self-silent, that femininity can be as fierce as fire, that beauty, when owned, becomes power. Every shimmer on her dress was a reminder, to herself and the world, that she had built this life from nothing but faith, talent, and glitter. In the end, Dolly's revolution wasn't loud. It was luminous. She showed that confidence isn't arrogance, and kindness isn't weakness. That sparkle doesn't hide substance. It reflects it. And in doing so, she changed what strength could look like. Because when Dolly Parton walked into a room covered in rhinestones, she wasn't trying to impress. She was trying to inspire. She wanted everyone watching to feel one thing. She could shine that bright, so could they. And soon, she would take that light back to where it all began. Chapter 12. Dollywood. For most people, success means leaving home. For Dolly Parton, it meant bringing home with her. By the mid-1980s, she had everything: hit records, Hollywood fame, awards, wealth. But deep inside, she missed the sound of her roots. The wind through the Smoky Mountains, the hymns echoing from wooden churches, the smell of biscuits on her mama's stove. She didn't just want to visit that world again. She wanted to build it for everyone. And that dream would become one of the greatest acts of love in American entertainment. Dollywood. It began as a whisper of an idea. A small amusement park in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, struggling to find its footing. When Dolly heard about it, she saw more than roller coasters and ticket booths. She saw potential, a way to bring jobs, joy, and pride to her hometown. She told her business partners, "I want to create a place where the Smoky Mountains sing again." They thought she was being poetic. She wasn't. She meant it literally. In 1986, Dollywood opened its gates to the public. But it wasn't just a theme park. It was a love letter to her people, her past, and her purpose. The park celebrated Appalachian culture, the crafts, the music, the spirit of community. Blacksmiths shaped iron by hand. Quilters worked their looms. Gospel choirs sang under open skies. And through it all, visitors could feel something rare in the air: authenticity. Because Dollywood wasn't designed by executives in suits. It was designed by a woman who still called her hometown home. For Dolly, Dollywood wasn't about business. It was about belonging. The people of Sevier County had once lived through hard times, scraping by on logging, farming, and small trade. Now, the park gave them opportunity. Within a year, Dollywood became one of the largest employers in the region. She didn't just create jobs, she created dignity. And that was her quiet revolution. "You can't be poor if you feel proud," she said once. "And I want my people to feel proud again." Visitors came from across the world. They expected a tourist attraction. What they found was a piece of Dolly's heart. Every corner of Dollywood reflected her story. The chapel at the top of the hill, the museum filled with her gowns and guitars, even a replica of her childhood cabin. Simple, small, yet sacred. Parents would step inside that cabin and whisper, "She came from this." And that's exactly what Dolly wanted them to feel. Awe, not of luxury, but of possibility. Because Dollywood was built on one truth she never forgot. You don't have to leave your roots to grow. Behind the scenes, Dolly poured herself into every detail. She walked the grounds in jeans and boots, tasting the food, testing the rides, shaking hands with workers. She remembered their names, their families, their stories. She told one ride operator, "You're the real star here because you're the one they'll remember." That humility, that sense of shared purpose, became the soul of Dollywood. It wasn't a monument to fame. It was a community built from gratitude. But the park's meaning ran deeper than business or nostalgia. It was also a symbol of return. Dolly had once left these mountains with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. Now she was coming back, not as a prodigal daughter, but as a builder, a giver. The opening ceremony was more than an event. It was a homecoming. Crowds lined the streets, waving handmade signs. "Welcome home, Dolly." As she cut the ribbon, she said, tears in her eyes, "Everything I am started right here. So I wanted to bring something back that would last." Dollywood became more than entertainment. It became an idea. That success means nothing if it doesn't lift others with you. She used the park as a foundation for her charities, funding scholarships, libraries, and community programs. And years later, it would become the birthplace of her most beloved project, the Imagination Library. Through Dollywood, millions of children around the world would receive free books, nurturing dreams just as she had once nurtured her own. Every year, Dolly returned to Dollywood, not as a celebrity, but as a neighbor. She'd ride through the park in her parade, waving from a carriage, eyes bright with the same wonder as the people watching. She didn't see fans. She saw family. And they saw her, not as an untouchable star, but as one of their own who had never forgotten where she came from. Dollywood kept expanding. New roller coasters, water parks, theaters, but its soul never changed. It remained what it had always been, a hymn to home. Each new generation visited not just for the rides, but for the reminder that dreams born in small towns can still reach the sky. And when they looked around, they saw proof, living proof, in the woman who had built it all. Because Dolly Parton had turned her story into a sanctuary, a place where the past and future shook hands. For Dolly, Dollywood was more than legacy. It was love made physical. The music of her childhood turned into laughter and light. And in that laughter, in that light, the spirit of the mountains lived on. Because no matter how far you go, you never really leave home. Not if you carry it in your heart and build it where others can find it again. From that one small park in Tennessee, a ripple of hope spread across the world. Dollywood became the bridge between fame and faith, business and kindness, nostalgia and progress. It proved that joy can be engineered, love can be designed, and home can be shared with everyone. And yet, for all she had built, Dolly still felt something missing. Because even the brightest dreamers sometimes face shadows. Chapter 13. Loss and Loneliness. For all her laughter, her sparkle, her songs, Dolly Parton was still human. And even the brightest stars must sometimes step into the quiet. Behind the wigs and rhinestones, there were nights when the crowds were gone, and the only sound was her own heartbeat echoing through an empty hotel room. because success, no matter how golden, casts long shadows. And Dolly was beginning to feel theirs. The early 1990s were a paradox. Her fame had reached new heights. Her songs were everywhere. Her name meant joy, generosity, and resilience. But fame, as she often said, is a funny kind of loneliness. It fills your days with people who love your light, but few who stay for your darkness. On tour, she'd stand before thousands, smiling as she sang. But when the lights went out, she'd return to silence, a suitcase of sequins and a heart full of questions. She once confessed, "I've been surrounded by people all my life, but sometimes I've never felt more alone." The pressure of constant perfection weighed heavy. She was expected to be the eternal optimist, always smiling, always joking, always strong. But inside, she battled exhaustion, self-doubt, and a deep ache for something ordinary. A quiet day, a private life, a still moment without cameras. The more she gave, the more the world demanded. And though her faith anchored her, there were nights when even prayer felt far away. She'd sit by her window, watching city lights flicker, and whisper, "Lord, is this what I wanted? Or just what happened?" It wasn't regret. It was reflection, the weight of a woman who had climbed every mountain, and now wondered what waited at the summit. Fame had also come with loss. Friends from her early years drifted away, their lives taking quieter turns. Her mentor, Porter Wagoner, had passed. Family members grew older, some ill, some gone. Even in laughter, grief became a silent companion, one she carried gracefully, hidden beneath her sparkle. She never spoke much about her pain, but when she did, it was with honesty. "Sometimes I sing because I hurt, but if I can make somebody else smile through my tears, that's worth it." That's who she was, a healer who turned heartbreak into harmony. Dolly's marriage to Carl Dean remained her anchor, but it was unconventional. He avoided fame completely, rarely appearing in public. They lived separate rhythms, she on the road, he in quiet Tennessee peace. Reporters speculated, but the truth was simpler. They loved each other deeply, just differently. Dolly said once, "He's my home, the only place I can be me without performing." Still, the distance of their worlds created solitude even within love. And that solitude often found its way into her songwriting. Songs like "Starting Over Again" and "Me and Little Andy" carried whispers of her hidden sorrow, little truths wrapped in melody. The 1990s also brought health scares, sleepless nights, and moments of burnout. The same drive that had fueled her success was beginning to wear her down. She'd pushed herself through every obstacle, but the body, like the soul, has limits. One night after a show, she fainted backstage. Doctors warned her, "Slow down or break down." For the first time, she paused. She took time off the road, retreated to her cabin in the Smoky Mountains, and stayed silent. No interviews, no schedules, just stillness. There, among the trees and the quiet, she began to heal. She walked barefoot through grass. She prayed. She wrote. And out of that silence came one truth that would redefine her life. You can't pour from an empty cup. That realization didn't end her loneliness, but it changed its meaning. She learned that solitude wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The quiet was where she refilled herself, where she found her purpose again. She began to see her own life as a song, not just the highs of melody, but the rests between the notes, the pauses that give the music meaning. She once said in an interview, "People think the glitz is who I am, but that's just how I decorate my sadness." Then she smiled, 'cause she always did. Through loss, Dolly discovered a deeper kind of love, compassion. She became even more generous, funding hospitals, scholarships, and children's programs quietly, without publicity. Each act of kindness became a way of turning pain into purpose. Her loneliness became empathy. Her exhaustion became service. Her silence became song again. That's the secret of Dolly's magic. She transforms suffering into light without ever pretending it doesn't hurt. In interviews years later, she would look back on that period not with regret, but gratitude. "Those were my shadow years," she said. "But I had to walk through the dark to learn how to shine brighter." It was then that she found a new balance. Less chasing, more choosing. She didn't have to prove herself anymore. She just had to be herself. And in that acceptance, she found peace. Not the kind that comes from applause, but from stillness. The loneliness never disappeared. Simply softened. It became part of her story, woven into every lyric, every smile, every joke that carried a hint of sadness behind it. She learned that being alone didn't mean being empty. It meant being real. And being real, she realized, was the most radical thing she could ever be. Because even the brightest light casts a shadow, and the shadow proves the light exists. Out of her loneliness, Dolly built bridges. Out of her losses, she built legacies. And out of her silence, she found new songs waiting to be born. The world would never see the tears she cried in the dark, but they would feel them, transformed into music that comforted millions. For in her quietest moments, she had discovered the truth that would define the rest of her life. You can't fill the world with light until you've faced your own darkness. Chapter 14. The Businesswoman Behind the Smile. For decades, the world saw Dolly Parton as the cheerful dreamer, the girl from the mountains who sang her way to glory. But beneath that smile lived something far rarer, a mind sharper than diamond. Because while most saw rhinestones, Dolly was building an empire. In a world where artists were treated like property, Dolly refused to be owned. She had learned early that charm could open doors, but contracts could close cages. So she read every clause, memorized every percentage, and made sure her signature meant freedom, not servitude. She once said, "I may look like a dumb blonde, but I'm nobody's fool. I just make sure I look this way so they'll let their guard down." That wasn't vanity, that was strategy. After her split from Porter Wagoner, Dolly swore she'd never again give away her rights. She formed her own publishing company, Velvet Apple Music, long before it was fashionable for artists to own their work. She negotiated record deals on her terms, keeping control over her masters and publishing. Every song she wrote, from Coat of Many Colors to I Will Always Love You, belonged to her. And when Whitney Houston's version of that song became one of the best-selling singles in history, it was Dolly, not the record labels, who earned the royalties. That wasn't luck. That was foresight. Dolly never flaunted her business acumen. She preferred to let the numbers speak for themselves. While others chased fame, she built infrastructure, studios, companies, charities. She surrounded herself with people she trusted, but she made every key decision herself. She knew where every dollar went, what every contract meant. Even her stage costumes, those glittering symbols of joy, were carefully trademarked and owned outright. She wasn't just an artist. She was the CEO of Dolly Parton Incorporated. Yet she never let money harden her. For Dolly, wealth was simply a tool, a way to make her dreams tangible. She said, "I don't care about being rich. I care about not being at somebody else's mercy." That philosophy became the foundation of everything she built. Because freedom, not fortune, was her true currency. As her fame grew, Dolly invested in what she knew best: stories. She started her own film and television production company, Sandala Productions, which produced hits like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Father of the Bride. Few realized she was behind those successes, and that was exactly how she liked it. She didn't crave credit. She craved creation. Her empire expanded quietly. Dollywood, record labels, publishing houses, philanthropic foundations. Each branch reflected her values: creativity, compassion, and community. But even as her fortune multiplied, she never stopped being frugal. She drove modest cars, paid her staff generously, and still carried cash in her purse, just in case. When asked why she never showed off her wealth, she said, "Honey, I'm too busy counting my blessings to count my money." In an industry dominated by men, Dolly's success was almost mythical. Executives underestimated her, and she let them. She knew the power of being underestimated. While they cracked jokes about her looks, she was signing deals that would outlast them. While they dismissed her as a novelty, she was buying the buildings they worked in. That's how she won, not with confrontation, but with quiet mastery. "You don't have to shout to be powerful," she said once. "You just have to know when to smile and when to sign." But what truly set Dolly apart was her generosity. She didn't hoard her success, she shared it. In 1988, she founded the Dollywood Foundation, offering scholarships for students in her hometown. She created jobs, funded schools, and launched programs that helped adults learn to read. Then came her most beloved creation, the Imagination Library, a program that mailed free books to children from birth to age 5. It began as a small idea in Sevier County. Today, it spans across continents, delivering millions of books each year. When asked why she started it, she said, "Because I know what it's like to want something more, and I want every child to know it too." Her empire wasn't built on greed, but on gratitude. Every dollar earned had a purpose: to give back, to build, to bless. Dolly turned her name into a brand, not through marketing, but through meaning. Every decision, every investment, reflected her faith in kindness and hard work. And perhaps that's what made her so extraordinary. She never separated business from heart. She proved that you could be both compassionate and cunning, generous and genius, glittering and grounded. Behind the smile was strategy. Behind the laughter, leadership. Behind the glamour, grit. She made the world underestimate her, and then she quietly changed it. Dolly didn't just play the game. She rewrote the rules, turning herself from artist to architect, from performer to powerhouse. And she did it all without losing her warmth, her wit, or her belief that success means nothing if it doesn't lift someone else with you. When the cameras stopped rolling and the lights dimmed, Dolly would often look back at her journey and smile. She'd say, "People ask me what's my secret. There ain't one. I just worked hard, prayed harder, and kept good people around me." That was her business plan. Faith, work, and kindness. Simple, effective, eternal. Dolly Parton's legacy isn't just in the songs she wrote or the awards she won. It's in the blueprint she left for every dreamer who dares to think big without losing their soul. She showed the world that you can be beautiful and brilliant, sweet and strategic, humble and unstoppable, all at once. Because behind every sparkle, every smile, every laugh, there was always a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. And she wasn't done yet. Chapter 15. The Gospel of Giving. Dolly Parton has always said that faith is not about preaching, it's about practice. And nowhere is that truer than in her lifelong devotion to giving. Because while the world remembers her for her music, those who know her best say her real masterpiece isn't a song at all. It's her heart. From the very beginning, Dolly's generosity was quiet, personal, almost sacred. Long before her name became global, she was paying the bills of struggling neighbors, buying groceries for families in need, and slipping cash into church donation boxes. She didn't call it charity. She called it doing what's right. Her mother had taught her that lesson. When they barely had enough to eat, her mother would still bake extra bread for others. That kind of compassion became Dolly's compass, one she would never lose, no matter how high she climbed. In 1988, she turned that compassion into something lasting. The Dollywood Foundation. Its first mission was simple: to keep local kids from dropping out of school. She met with educators, community leaders, and parents, asking one question: what's stopping these kids from dreaming? The answer was heartbreakingly simple: poverty, discouragement, and lack of opportunity. So Dolly began a scholarship program that offered every high school senior in Sevier County financial help if they graduated. It wasn't much by Hollywood standards, but to those students it was hope, tangible, immediate, life-changing. Graduation rates skyrocketed. The town's pride returned. And Dolly proved that you don't need miracles to change lives. Just love, structure, and follow-through. But Dolly didn't stop there. In 1995, she launched the project that would define her humanitarian legacy, the Imagination Library. It started small, a simple idea to give every child in her hometown a free book each month, from birth to age 5. Her goal was to plant seeds of imagination, one mailbox at a time. She said, "You can't teach reading without giving books. I know what it's like to want to dream but not have the tools." At first, critics doubted her. They said it would never grow beyond her county. But Dolly smiled, as she always did when someone told her she couldn't. By 2025, the Imagination Library had given away over 200 million books worldwide. From Appalachia to Australia, from the UK to Canada. Each one carried her message. Dream big even if you're small. The world began to notice. But Dolly never took credit. She deflected praise with humor. "If you see me as a saint, you don't know me well enough. I'm just trying to do my share while I'm here." To her, giving wasn't a performance, it was purpose. The gospel of giving wasn't about money. It was about meaning. She said, "We're all just walking each other home. Might as well make the trip kind." In 2016, tragedy struck her beloved Smoky Mountains. Wildfires swept through East Tennessee, destroying homes and leaving families with nothing. Within days, Dolly launched the My People Fund, pledging $1,000 a month for 6 months to every family who had lost their home. No bureaucracy, no red tape, just help. Reporters asked why she moved so fast. She said simply, "Because when your people are hitting, you don't wait, you run." The fund rebuilt hundreds of homes, restored livelihoods, and reminded the world that compassion moves faster than policy ever could. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit years later, Dolly stepped in again, quietly donating $1 million to vaccine research at Vanderbilt University. That donation helped fund early trials that would lead to the Moderna vaccine. When journalists called her a hero, she brushed it off. "I'm just happy to help. The sooner we get back to singin' and huggin', the better." Her laughter carried humility, but her impact was profound. In the middle of fear and uncertainty, Dolly reminded people what hope sounds like. Faith had always guided her giving, not the kind of faith shouted from pulpits, but the kind lived quietly in action. She didn't preach. She practiced. Her gospel was generosity. Her sermons were scholarships. Her hymns were handshakes. Her prayers were paychecks for strangers who needed them more. She said, "You don't have to be rich to give. You just have to care enough to notice." That sentence became the motto of her foundation and her life. As awards and honors poured in, humanitarian prizes, state medals, even honorary doctorates, Dolly stayed unchanged. She accepted each one with her trademark grin, then gave the credit back to her fans, her faith, and her family. "Everything I am, I owe to God, Mama, and a good dose of common sense," she joked. But everyone around her knew the truth. Dolly's generosity wasn't just kindness, it was leadership. She showed the world that success doesn't have to make you harder, can make you softer, wiser, more giving. She often said that every gift she gave was just her way of paying rent for the space I take up on earth. To her, giving wasn't something extra. It was her duty, her devotion, her gospel. She believed that love, when given freely, multiplies. And she lived that belief every single day. In later interviews, when asked how she wanted to be remembered, she smiled gently and said, "I don't need statues or streets named after me. If I can be remembered as someone who tried to make life a little easier for others, that'll do." That's the quiet truth behind the legend. Behind every song and sparkle, there was always a servant's heart. A heart that gave, not for attention but out of affection. Dolly's gospel of giving has no altar, no denomination, no sermon. It's universal, a reminder that kindness can outlive fame. That compassion, when sung loudly enough, becomes its own kind of prayer. Because in the end, the greatest legacy isn't what we keep, it's what we give away. From the Smoky Mountains to the biggest stages in the world, Dolly Parton built her life on love. Love for her people, her roots, her faith, and her fellow dreamers. And if her music was her message, her generosity was her gospel. The gospel of giving, not written in scripture, but lived in kindness. Chapter 16, Faith and Fire. Dolly Parton has always been called many things. Icon, legend, queen of country. But beneath the fame, beneath the rhinestones and the laughter, she has always called herself something simpler. A believer. Not in rules or religion, but in something deeper, faith. A quiet flame that never burned out, even when the world around her did. Faith for Dolly was never about sermons. It was about service. It wasn't what she said on Sunday. It was how she lived on Monday. She once said, "My faith keeps me humble, my dreams keep me busy, and my God keeps me going." And for all her glamour, she never let that truth fade. No matter how many stages she stood on, she carried the same small-town spirituality she'd learned in the one-room church of Locust Ridge, Tennessee. She still remembered the wooden pews that creaked under old hymnals, her mother's voice harmonizing softly beside her, and the preacher shouting, "Let your light shine." Decades later, she still would. Dolly never claimed perfection. In fact, she was quick to say she was far from it. She called herself a work in progress with sequins. Her faith wasn't loud. It was lived. It showed in her compassion, her forgiveness, her resilience. She forgave the people who hurt her, thanked the ones who doubted her, and prayed for both. When asked if she ever lost her belief, she laughed and said, "Honey, I've cussed God plenty, but I never stopped talking to him." Because to Dolly, faith wasn't about fear. It was about relationship. But even believers face storms. There were seasons in her life when pain tested her faith. Illness, exhaustion, loss. She once said in a rare interview, "I've had nights where I cried until I couldn't breathe. But when I ran out of tears, I found my strength." That strength wasn't pride. It was prayer. The quiet kind that asks for peace, not miracles. Her faith didn't shield her from suffering. It shaped how she walked through it. As fame grew, so did the temptation of ego, the pull of praise, the glitter of celebrity. But Dolly had a compass. Whenever she felt the world getting too loud, she'd retreat to her cabin, pray, and write songs. She said, "When I can't hear God, I start writing until He answers back." Those songs became her psalms. Pieces like "Light of a Clear Blue Morning" and "Hello God." Songs that didn't preach but reached. They reminded listeners that even in chaos, grace whispers. For Dolly, faith was not about judgment. She refused to condemn others or claim divine authority. Instead, she preached love through example, inclusion through action. She once said, "I don't think it's my place to judge anybody. I think it's my place to love them. That's what my Jesus would do." And in those words, millions found comfort. Because her version of faith wasn't a weapon, it was a welcome. In interviews, she often joked about her contradictions. A gospel singer with glitter eyeliner, a spiritual woman who loved wigs and high heels. But to her, there was no contradiction at all. She'd smile and say, "If God didn't want me to shine, He wouldn't have made me sparkle." That humor, that balance between reverence and rebellion, became the essence of her power. Her faith didn't make her smaller. It made her free. Every morning before the chaos of work began, Dolly prayed. She didn't ask for fame or money or miracles. She asked for light, the kind that guides, not blinds. She prayed for her family, her fans, and even her critics. And when she couldn't find words, she sang them. Because to Dolly, music was her form of worship, the way she connected heaven and earth. Her guitar became her pulpit, her lyrics her scripture, her voice her prayer. And every time she sang, people felt it, that mix of fire and faith. Faith also became her fuel for forgiveness. She forgave business partners who betrayed her, journalists who mocked her, even friends who left. She said, "If I don't forgive, I can't move on. And I've got too far to go to stay stuck." That was her gospel, simple, stubborn, and strong. She believed that mercy was power, and she lived it every day. When she performed gospel music live, she always said it wasn't entertainment, it was testimony. Audiences would cry, sing along, and feel something ancient stirring in them. Because Dolly didn't just sing about faith, she sang from it. Her voice carried something rare, conviction without condemnation, warmth without weakness. She proved that spirituality could be inclusive, joyful, and human. Her faith also guided her business, her giving, and her endurance. Whenever a project failed, she'd shrug and say, "If it's meant for me, it won't pass me by. God's got perfect timing. I just wish he'd hurry sometimes." That patience became her power. She moved through life like someone who knew that even detours are part of the map. Because her faith wasn't blind, it was brave. A trust forged in trial, laughter, and love. When she spoke about her faith in later years, she didn't use big words or heavy theology. She just smiled and said, "Faith is like fire. You don't have to see it to feel it." That fire had guided her since childhood, through loss, success, heartbreak, and glory. It burned quietly beneath every song, every laugh, every act of kindness. And maybe that's why her light never dimmed, because it wasn't powered by fame. It was powered by faith. In a world that often confuses loudness with strength, Dolly Parton became proof that true power whispers, forgives, gives, believes. Her faith was not flawless, it was fearless. And her fire was not for show, it was survival. Because the real miracle of Dolly Parton isn't that she found fame, it's that she never lost faith. Chapter 17. Reinvention at 60. By the time most artists reach 60, they begin to slow down. They look back at what was, not forward to what could be. But Dolly Parton, she was just getting started. At 60, she didn't see an ending. She saw a new beginning, another mountain to climb, another song to sing, another way to surprise the world. In 2006, while the world was busy labeling her a legend, Dolly was rewriting her own story. She launched new albums, wrote new songs, produced new shows, and even began collaborations with artists half her age. Where others saw age as a limit, Dolly saw it as proof of endurance. "You're never too old to dream another dream," she said. "If you've still got breath, you've still got purpose." That quote wasn't marketing. It was her mission statement. In the studio, she worked harder than ever. 12-hour days, endless rehearsals, still chasing perfection. Her energy shocked everyone around her. When a young producer once asked, "Dolly, don't you ever get tired?" she smiled and said, "Of course I do. But dreams don't rest, so neither do I." That was her secret. She treated reinvention not as a burden, but as a blessing. At 60, Dolly began collaborating with younger stars. Miley Cyrus, Kesha, Pentatonix, and others who grew up idolizing her. She didn't compete with them. She completed them, bridging generations with a grace few artists could match. In one interview, she said, "Every new artist I work with reminds me of who I was. Hungry, scared, hopeful. And I love that feeling. It keeps me alive." And it did. Because Dolly never let nostalgia chain her down. She looked at the past with gratitude, and the future with fire. But reinvention wasn't just about collaboration. It was about courage. The courage to evolve when the world thinks you've peaked. The courage to be curious again. She explored new genres: bluegrass, gospel, pop, even EDM remixes of her classics. Each time, critics doubted her. Each time, she proved them wrong. Because Dolly never chased trends, she chased truth. And truth, as she knew, never goes out of style. Then came Netflix. New audience. A new frontier. In her 60s and 70s, Dolly began producing shows and movies for streaming. Projects like Dolly Parton's Heartstrings, Christmas on the Square, and more. She wasn't just the star. She was the storyteller, the producer, the architect. She once joked, "They told me I'd slow down after 60. I told them they'd better speed up." The world did. But reinvention wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. Dolly began talking more openly about aging, beauty, and identity. People asked why she didn't hide her surgeries, her wigs, or her sequins. She laughed and said, "It costs a lot of money to look this cheap." Behind the humor was wisdom, a quiet defiance of shame. She redefined what it meant to grow older on her own terms. Her message was clear. You can be 60, 70, 80, and still shine. Even as she kept performing, Dolly made time to reflect. She began to mentor young women, artists who looked to her not just for fame, but for faith. She told them, "The world will try to tell you who you are. Don't listen. You already know. You were born with a purpose. Your job is just to live it loud." To them, she wasn't just a singer. She was proof that authenticity outlasts everything, even time. As her 60s turned into her 70s, Dolly's fire didn't fade, it deepened. Her tours sold out faster than ever. New generations discovered her through TikTok, remixes, and memes. But what truly touched her was how young people connected not to her fame, but to her values. She represented kindness in an age of cynicism, faith in an age of doubt, joy in an age of noise. And she knew it. "If I can be a light for somebody else, then that's the only reason I'm still here," she said. Even the younger stars she mentored began to call her Aunt Dolly. She laughed about it, but it moved her deeply. To her, being an icon meant nothing compared to being a guide. Because she had spent her life climbing, now she wanted to build ladders. She once said, "When you've been blessed, it's your job to be a blessing." That was her reinvention. Not to stay relevant, but to stay useful. She also embraced technology, releasing audiobooks, collaborating with digital creators, even using social media to share humor, hope, and heart. She turned platforms into pulpits, not of religion, but of resilience. Her posts weren't about her looks or luxury. They were about laughter, music, and reminders to be kind. She didn't need algorithms to trend. She had authenticity, and that always wins. And through it all, Dolly remained humble. She said, "I never think about legacy. I think about right now. Because if you live the moment right, the future takes care of itself." That was the secret to her eternal youth. Not surgery, not fame, but presence. She lived each moment like it was a song still being written. And that, perhaps, was her truest reinvention. The refusal to let age define her spirit. 60, she reinvented herself. At 70, she inspired a generation. At 80, she'll still be laughing, singing, and giving. Because Dolly Parton doesn't age. She evolves. Her sparkle doesn't fade, it multiplies. Her story doesn't end, it expands. "If you see me slow down," she once said, "it's just because I'm shifting gears." Dolly's life after 60 wasn't a second act. It was proof that purpose doesn't retire, that the human spirit doesn't expire. She showed the world that the true secret of reinvention isn't changing who you are. It's returning to your essence with new strength. Because when the fire of youth cools, the fire of faith takes over. And in Dolly's case, that flame burns brighter than ever. Chapter 18. The Pandemic Angel. The world had fallen silent. Streets once filled with laughter now echoed with fear. From London to Los Angeles, from the Smoky Mountains to Seoul, humanity held its breath. And in that silence, one familiar voice rose again. Soft, hopeful, unmistakable. Dolly Parton. In 2020, the world was caught in a storm it had never known. A pandemic that blurred borders, ended routines, and tested every soul. And just when people felt powerless, Dolly reminded them that compassion is never quarantined. While some hoarded supplies, she sent help. While others spread fear, she spread faith. Because to her, crisis was never a reason to retreat. It was a call to rise. In the heart of that chaos, Dolly made a decision that would ripple across the world. She donated $1 million to Vanderbilt University's medical center, funding vaccine research that would later help develop the Moderna vaccine. It wasn't a press stunt. It wasn't for applause. It was instinct, an act of faith in science, in humanity, and in hope itself. When asked about it later, she said with her signature humility, "I'm just happy to help. If my money can do some good, then I'm blessed to give it." That donation didn't just change headlines, changed lives. Doctors at Vanderbilt confirmed that her contribution directly accelerated testing phases, shaving weeks off development time. And while others argued online about politics and fear, Dolly quietly helped save millions. It was poetic. The woman who'd spent her life healing hearts through music was now helping heal bodies through science. The world began to call her the Pandemic Angel. But Dolly never saw herself as a savior. She saw herself as a servant. "I don't do big things," she said. "I just do small things with a lot of love." And maybe that's why it mattered so much. Because in a time when everyone felt distant, Dolly's actions reminded people of connection, of what it means to care, to give, to believe in something bigger than yourself. She didn't stop there. When concerts were canceled and the music world went dark, she found another way to reach people. From her home in Tennessee, she began reading bedtime stories online for children, a series she called Good Night with Dolly. Wrapped in a blanket of warmth and humor, she read classics like The Little Engine That Could, smiling at the camera like a grandmother to the world. Millions tuned in. Parents cried quietly as their children drifted to sleep to her voice. Because in a time when everything felt uncertain, Dolly gave them something simple and sacred: comfort. Even when her Dollywood parks were closed, she kept paying her employees. "No one was left behind," she said. "If I've got it, my people got it too." That sentence captured her entire philosophy: leadership through love. To Dolly, wealth wasn't ownership. It was stewardship, a chance to keep the lights on, not just in her world, but in everyone else's. The internet began to notice. Across social media, people wrote messages like, "When I grow up, I want to be like Dolly. She's the only celebrity who makes me feel safe. We don't deserve her, but thank God we have her." Memes called her Saint Dolly. Artists painted her face as an angel. Scientists named her in vaccine credits. And yet, when interviewers mentioned it, she laughed. "I'm no saint. I just try to shine my little light in my little corner and hope it helps somebody else see." That humility, that blend of strength and softness, made her more than a legend. It made her human hope personified. When the vaccines rolled out, Dolly received hers publicly, singing a new version of Jolene that made the internet smile. Vaccine, 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 vaccine. It was humor in the face of history. It was light in the middle of the storm. And once again, Dolly proved that kindness doesn't have to be solemn to be sacred. Can laugh, sing, and shine all at once. She continued donating to hospitals, schools, and local families struggling with the pandemic's aftermath. She supported artists whose tours had been canceled and funded teachers adapting to online education. To her, giving wasn't about numbers, it was about names, faces, lives, she said. The world's been good to me. The least I can do is return the favor. But behind her laughter, there were also moments of solitude. Even Dolly, the eternal optimist, admitted to nights of loneliness during lockdown. She said, "I'm used to hugging people, holding hands, being close. When I couldn't do that, I prayed harder. I sang louder." And that's what she did. She turned pain into melody once more. She wrote new songs about healing, faith, and renewal. And when the world began to reopen, those songs became anthems of resilience. The world saw her not just as a singer, but as a symbol, proof that compassion can cut through chaos. In every crisis, some choose fear. Dolly chose faith. Not blind faith, but brave faith, the kind that acts. She became the bridge between science and spirit, between laughter and loss, between despair and devotion. When asked what she learned from the pandemic, she smiled softly and said, "That we're all fragile, but we're also tougher than we think. You can't stop a heart that still believes." And with that, she summed up her entire life's philosophy: faith without fear, hope without noise, love without limits. When the world grew dark, she didn't hide her light. She lifted it high enough for everyone to see. And in that glow, millions found strength, laughter, and a reason to believe that goodness still exists. Because sometimes angels don't descend from heaven. They rise from the hills of Tennessee, with a guitar, a giggle, and a heart that heals the world. Chapter 19, Beyond the Wig. There's a moment before every show, a silence almost sacred, when Dolly Parton looks in the mirror. The hair is big, the makeup bright, the outfit shining. But in that reflection, beneath the glitter and glow, lives something few people see. The woman, not the legend. This chapter isn't about the icon. It's about the human behind her. The woman who built armor out of rhinestones and courage out of kindness. Dolly once said, "The wig's just the wrapping paper. The real gift is the heart underneath." For decades, the world adored her sparkle, her humor, her beauty, her near-mythic image. But that image came at a cost. Because behind the smile, there were years of exhaustion, self-doubt, and the constant pressure to stay perfect. She turned herself into a symbol, and sometimes symbols forget they're human. There were nights when the applause faded, when the lights dimmed, and she'd sit alone, removing her wig in the mirror. Beneath it, her natural hair, her tired eyes, her real self. She once said quietly, "Sometimes I take off all the makeup, all the glitter, and I just look at myself and think, well, there you are, girl. Still standin'." That moment of honesty, the woman behind the wig, was her truest self. Vulnerable, grateful, real. Dolly learned early that beauty was both power and prison. Growing up poor, she had watched women in town wear lipstick and perfume like armor. To her, femininity wasn't vanity. It was rebellion. It was saying, "I may be poor, but I can still be beautiful." When fame came, she amplified that idea. Bigger hair, brighter colors, louder laughter. It wasn't to hide. It was to claim space in a world that tried to make women small. "I wasn't gonna blend in," she said. "I was gonna stand out like a beacon." But the beacon sometimes burned too hot. There were moments when fame became a furnace. Critics mocked her appearance. Headlines reduced her to jokes. Even some fans expected her to be endlessly cheerful, endlessly perfect. And through it all, she smiled. Because for Dolly, smiling wasn't denial. It was discipline. "You can cry later," she'd tell herself. "Right now, you've got a show to do." But behind closed doors, she wasn't afraid to cry. She's spoken about those lonely hotel rooms, the endless tours, the pressure to be on all the time. Moments when she questioned her worth beyond the image. She once admitted, "There was a time when I didn't know who Dolly Parton was, the person or the persona." It took years, decades, to find peace between the two. to accept that the wig and the woman were both true. Dolly often joked about her wigs, how she owned hundreds of them, each one with its own name and personality. They were symbols, yes, but also shields, she said. People laugh at my wigs, but they let me hide when I need to. They're my security blanket and my crown. That paradox, vulnerability wrapped in confidence, is what made her so magnetic. Because deep down, she knew what every human knows. We all wear wigs of some kind. Masks, personas, protections. Hers just happened to sparkle. Over time, she learned to find balance. To let the wig serve the woman, not define her. To let the laughter protect her without silencing her pain. And through that balance came wisdom. She began speaking openly about mental health, loneliness, and aging. Not as confessions, but as connections. She wanted people to know that behind the glamour was a heart that bled, a spirit that broke, and a soul that healed. Dolly once told an interviewer, "People say I'm fake, but that's fine. My hair's fake, my nails are fake, but what's real is my heart." It was the perfect paradox. The woman who built an empire on fantasy became one of the most authentic souls in show business. She used artifice to reveal truth, not to hide it. And that's what made her extraordinary. In her 70s, Dolly began to show more of her natural side. She released acoustic albums that stripped back production, just her voice, her guitar, and her faith. Fans called them soul portraits, because in those songs, you could hear the woman behind the wig, the mountain girl who never forgot where she came from, the dreamer who still believed in the light of a clear blue morning. Dolly's humanity became her greatest gift to the world. Not her perfection, but her honesty. She reminded millions that beauty doesn't mean flawlessness. It means courage, the courage to keep showing up, even when you're tired, even when you're misunderstood. That was the real Dolly, not the superstar, not the saint, but the survivor. And that's what made her love eternal. Because every woman who ever felt unseen saw herself in Dolly. Every man who ever doubted his dreams found hope in her words. Every person who ever wore a mask to survive learned from her how to shine through it. She wasn't pretending to be perfect. She was showing that you can be human and radiant at the same time. Beyond the wig, beyond the fame, beyond the sparkle, there is a soul that still whispers prayers at night. A woman who still writes songs in the dark. A dreamer who still believes in goodness. Because at the end of every day, when the stage lights fade and the makeup wipes away, Dolly Parton is still that little girl from Tennessee, singing to the mountains, asking them to listen. The world may remember her for her hair, her smile, her glittering gowns. But those who listen closely know, her real beauty has always come from within. Because the greatest thing Dolly Parton ever wore wasn't a wig or a dress or a crown. It was her authenticity. Chapter 20. The Price of Light. Light is beautiful, but it can also burn. And for Dolly Parton, fame has always been both blessing and burden. Because when you shine as brightly as she does, you don't just illuminate the world, you expose yourself to it. This is the story of what it costs to live in the light. The price of being seen by everyone, but known by few. Dolly has lived more than 60 years in front of cameras. She's seen her face on billboards, her name in lights, her songs in history books. But fame, she learned, isn't just applause. It's attention, and attention has teeth. Every smile she gave was analyzed. Every word she spoke, twisted or worshipped. Every act of kindness, questioned for motive. She once said softly, "When you're in the spotlight too long, it starts to feel like an X-ray. They see right through you, even the parts you wish they wouldn't." At home, away from the noise, Dolly found peace in silence. She never built a mansion in Los Angeles or New York. She preferred her Tennessee hills, the privacy, the trees, the sound of birds instead of tabloids. She said, "People think fame makes you free. Sometimes it traps you. I need my mountains to remind me I'm still me." That contrast between stage light and sunrise became her balance. But even balance has its breaking points. Over the decades, Dolly endured gossip, rumors, and public scrutiny. Her body, her relationships, her faith, all turned into headlines. She never fought back with anger. She fought back with grace. When one tabloid ran a cruel story about her, she laughed and said, "They said I had 3 husbands and 4 hearts. Well, at least they think I'm interesting." It wasn't denial. It was defense. Humor was her armor, her way of reclaiming dignity from mockery. There were darker moments too, nights of exhaustion, pressure, and loneliness, when fame became so heavy it felt like a cage. When she wondered if the world loved her for who she was, or for the character she'd created. She once confessed, "I built this big OL image to protect myself. But sometimes I miss being just a girl with a guitar." Behind the sparkle was a soul that longed for simplicity. The price of light is solitude, because the higher you rise, the thinner the air becomes, and the fewer people you can truly trust. Dolly learned that truth early. She saw how fame could change people, how friends turned opportunists and strangers turned critics. So she built her circle small: family, faith, a handful of loyal friends. "I've got enough people telling me I'm wonderful," she said. "What I need are the ones who tell me when I'm wrong." Yet even as she protected her heart, she never let bitterness win. Her kindness remained unshaken, because she believed the light was worth the pain. She often said, "If I have to take a few arrows for shining, so be it. I'd rather be a lighthouse than a shadow." That sentence defines her entire life. Because for Dolly, light isn't just something she emits, it's something she endures. But the light also comes with a quieter pain: misunderstanding. No matter how much she gives, some people still doubt her sincerity. They mistake her generosity for branding, her faith for image. It used to hurt. But over time, she learned to stop explaining herself. "You don't owe everyone an explanation," she said. "You owe yourself peace." That lesson took her half a lifetime to learn. And once she did, she stopped living to please and started living to serve. Sometimes she still feels the weight of expectation, millions of fans who look to her for strength. But she reminds herself, she's not a goddess. She's a girl who works hard, prays harder, and laughs loud enough to drown her fears. In one rare interview, she said, "People think I'm fearless. I'm not. I'm just faithful." And that's how she carries the light, not as perfection, but as perseverance. The world rarely sees her moments of doubt, the tears before shows, the exhaustion after tours, the loneliness of hotel rooms. She doesn't hide them because she's ashamed. She hides them because she doesn't want to pass her pain on to others. That's the price of light too, protecting others from your own shadows. "If I can make somebody smile today," she said once, "then it's been worth every ache I've ever felt." She learned that fame doesn't make you untouchable, makes you transparent. And transparency, when you embrace it, becomes freedom. So she began speaking more openly about the pressure to stay relevant, about mental health, about aging in public. She didn't need to hide behind youth anymore. Her beauty had outgrown mirrors. Her light wasn't reflection, it was radiance. When asked what kept her shining all these years, she said, "Because somebody's always watching, somebody who needs a reason to believe." That's the power of her light. Not that it's perfect, but that it's shared. She doesn't guard it. She gives it away, piece by piece, to those who have none left. And in that giving, she renews her own. Fame will always have a price. But Dolly Parton pays it willingly, because she knows that light, no matter how heavy, is the only thing that can guide the lost. She has learned to live with the burn, to find beauty in the weight of it, because the price of light is love. And for Dolly, that's a bargain she'll always take. Chapter 21. Sisterhood and Strength. In every era of her life, Dolly Parton has carried one truth close to her heart. Women don't just survive together. They rise together. And in an industry built by men, sustained by power, and softened by illusion, Dolly built something rare, a sisterhood. This is the story of how she turned competition into connection, rivalry into respect, and fame into a force for unity. From her earliest days in Nashville, Dolly felt the sting of being underestimated. Producers called her too pretty to be serious. Writers dismissed her lyrics, and some women saw her as a rival instead of an ally. But Dolly never fought fire with fire. She fought it with grace. "I've never felt I had to push another woman down to stand taller," she once said. "We're all climbing the same mountain. Some just wear prettier shoes." It was humor, but it was truth. Because even when others saw her as a caricature, she saw herself as a bridge. Throughout her career, Dolly reached back for others. Young singers, songwriters, and dreamers. She took them under her wing. She shared advice, opportunities, and above all, confidence. She would tell them, "Honey, if you're gonna fly, you better learn to flap your own wings, but I'll help you off the ground." That mentorship became a quiet revolution. She didn't just talk about empowerment. She embodied it. Dolly saw every woman's story as sacred. She championed the mothers working 9 to 5, the waitresses, the singers in smoky bars. She turned their struggles into songs. 9 to 5, coat of many colors. Just because I'm a woman. These weren't just lyrics. They were lifelines, voices for the unheard. And though critics labeled her as too glamorous to be relatable, her message cut deeper than any makeup could hide. She sang for every woman who ever had to smile through exhaustion, who ever hid tears with lipstick, who ever refused to give up. Behind the scenes, her friendships were legendary. She stood by other female artists when the industry tried to pit them against each other. She defended names like Reba, Loretta, and Tammy, not as competitors but as comrades. When asked about rivalry, she smiled and said, "There's enough room for all of us in the spotlight. It just shines brighter when we share it." That philosophy became her quiet rebellion against the culture of comparison. Her bond with women extended beyond music. She employed women as managers, producers, and creative directors long before the industry welcomed them. She funded female-led programs, helped young girls from rural communities go to college, and created roles for women at Dollywood that empowered them to lead. Her philosophy was simple. If you see someone you can lift, lift them. That's how you stay strong, by sharing your strength. But sisterhood wasn't always easy. Dolly faced her share of judgment, from women who misunderstood her image, who saw her beauty as artifice rather than armor. She could have fought back with words. Instead, she answered with example. In one interview, when asked if she ever felt criticized by other women, she said, "Sure, sometimes. But I don't take offense. I just try to show 'em there's more to me than meets the eye. And more to them, too." That's what made her leadership so rare. It wasn't defensive, it was inclusive. Her greatest gift to future generations wasn't fame. It was faith in each other. Through her foundation, she encouraged young girls to dream beyond boundaries. Through her music, she taught them that strength isn't about shouting. It's about standing firm in who you are. And through her life, she modeled what it means to rise without resentment. "You don't have to fight to win," she said. "You just have to love harder than they hate." As she aged, that sisterhood deepened. She became a symbol for resilience, a spiritual big sister to women across generations. Younger artists like Miley Cyrus, Casey Musgraves, and Brandi Carlile called her mentor, friend, and muse. She didn't just advise them, she listened. Because for Dolly, mentorship wasn't hierarchy, it was harmony. She said, "I don't want anyone to walk behind me or in front of me. I want them to walk beside me." That's what true sisterhood sounds like. When Dolly performed with other women, whether on the 9 to 5 reunion, at award shows, or gospel collaborations, It was never about competition. It was communion, a celebration of shared stories, shared pain, shared strength. Each harmony carried a lifetime of struggle, a triumph sung in unity. And in those moments, you could feel what she believed her entire life. That a woman alone is powerful, but women together are unstoppable. She also became a champion for women far beyond the stage. For teachers, nurses, single mothers, and every soul balancing survival with grace. She said, "Every woman I meet is a story worth hearing. Every wrinkle, every scar, every laugh line, that's where the beauty lives." Her compassion became her rebellion, a quiet defiance against a world that still measured women by youth and beauty. Sisterhood and strength. Two words that defined her legacy more than any award ever could. Because Dolly Parton didn't just lift women up. She taught them to lift each other. In her laughter they found freedom. In her kindness they found courage. And in her story they found themselves. "If you want to be strong," she said once, "learn to hold someone else's hand." That was her greatest secret, love as leadership. The world may remember her for her songs and her sparkle, but her true power lies in the sisterhood she built, a lineage of women who refuse to dim their light for anyone, because strength isn't loud, shared. Chapter 22. The Written Legacy. There are singers who live through their voices, and then there are artists who live forever through their words. For Dolly Parton, legacy was never just what people heard. It was what they could read. Her songs, her books, her journals. They became scripture for anyone who ever believed that dreams could be written into existence. Dolly wrote her first song when she was 5 years old. She didn't know about melody or meter. She just knew about feeling. Her mother used to say, "Write what hurts and write what heals." And that's exactly what Dolly did for the next 7 decades. Every heartbreak, every victory, every prayer found its way into her notebook. A notebook she carried everywhere, stuffed with scraps of paper, napkins, even receipts scribbled with lyrics. She once joked, "I can't keep a secret, but I sure can keep a song." Through those pages, she preserved not just her own life, but the life of a generation. Her lyrics became archives of emotion, each verse a story, each chorus a confession. Jolene, coat of many colors. I will always love you. 3 songs, 3 worlds, 3 immortal pieces of her soul. Together they form a map, the geography of a woman who learned that honesty is the only ink that never fades. As the years went on, Dolly realized her legacy wasn't just musical, it was literary. She began writing books, reflections, memoirs, and collections of her lyrics. Each one was more than nostalgia, it was instruction, a field guide to perseverance wrapped in humor and humility. In her memoir Songteller, she revealed the stories behind the melodies, how some were born from laughter, others from nights spent crying until dawn. She wrote not to impress, but to remind that even legends are human, and even humans can become legends. Her written words traveled further than she ever could. Schools began teaching her songs as poetry. Scholars studied her writing style, its blend of simplicity and wisdom. They called her the Appalachian Shakespeare. She laughed at that title, of course, but it wasn't wrong. Because like Shakespeare, her truth was timeless. She wrote about poverty, faith, love, jealousy, and forgiveness. Themes that never age because hearts never do. Dolly once said, "I've written thousands of songs, but I still haven't run out of things to say." That wasn't ego. It was gratitude. Because for her, writing wasn't a career. It was a calling, a form of prayer. When the world grew too heavy, she turned to paper. When words failed others, she lent them hers. And in doing so, she gave voice to the voiceless. Her most profound project of all was one that few expected, the Imagination Library. Through it, she mailed millions of free books to children across the world, each one carrying her name and a wish for their future. If you can read, you can dream, she said. And if you can dream, you can do anything. That library became more than philanthropy. It became a movement, a bridge between literacy and legacy, between story and salvation. Every book was a torch passed to the next dreamer. As the years went by, journalists often asked her how she wanted to be remembered. She never mentioned awards or fortune. She said, "I just want my words to outlive my looks." And they will. Because when the stage lights fade and the world moves on, the songs will remain, woven into lullabies, weddings, funerals, and quiet moments of courage. That's the kind of immortality no monument can match. Dolly's writing was never about sophistication. It was about sincerity. She believed that if words came from the heart, they'd find another. That's why her songs resonated across cultures, across languages. Because she wrote like a friend, not a philosopher. She once said, "If you can't say it plain, you probably don't mean it." That's why her legacy isn't trapped in time. Breathe, adapt, keeps whispering to every generation that listens. In her later years, Dolly began archiving her letters and notes, not for vanity, but for posterity. She wanted future dreamers to know the truth behind her glitter. That success was built not just on talent, but on 10,000 small choices, and an endless belief in something better. Each page she saved became a piece of history, each lyric a timestamp of the human condition. She said, "I've told my story in songs, but maybe someday people will read between the lines." They will, because her story was never just about music, it was about meaning. Today, libraries, schools, and museums across the world hold her words like treasures. Her handwriting, her annotations, her metaphors, all preserved for the generations who will never meet her, but will still feel her. That's the miracle of the written word. Never dies. And Dolly Parton, in her quiet wisdom, made sure hers would live forever. Because legacy isn't built by fame. It's built by faith in words. The courage to write them, the humility to share them, and the grace to let them go. Her story reminds us that immortality doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the storytellers. And as long as someone somewhere is humming her lyrics, reading her pages, or finding courage in her honesty, Dolly Parton's story will never end. Chapter 23. A voice for every heart. Every great singer leaves behind songs, but only a few leave behind voices that feel like home. Dolly Parton's voice is more than sound. It's memory. It's hope. It's a reminder that no matter who you are, where you come from, or what you've lost, you can still find a melody strong enough to carry your soul. This is the story of how one woman's voice came to speak for every heart. There are singers who perform, and there are those who confess. Dolly's voice has always belonged to the latter. From the first time she sang in church as a child, bare feet on wooden floors, sunlight through dusty windows, her voice carried something older than her years, something ancient, something human. She said, "I never sang to impress. I sang to express." That distinction made all the difference. Her songs weren't written for perfection. They were written for people. The lonely, the hopeful, tired, the dreamers who didn't dare to say their dreams aloud. When she sang "Coat of Many Colors," mothers wept. When she sang "Jolene," lovers listened in silence. When she sang "I Will Always Love You," the world stopped breathing for 4 minutes. Because her voice didn't just tell stories, it told truths. Dolly's voice became a bridge between worlds, country and gospel, sorrow and joy, sin and salvation. Crossed borders without needing translation. It was, in her own words, just the way my heart sounds when it's open. That openness made her universal. People who didn't even speak English memorized her songs phonetically. She became a soundtrack to lives she would never see, from small towns in Appalachia to city streets in Tokyo. Her music became a language of its own, one made of honesty, humility, and heart. But what makes a voice truly eternal? It's not range, it's not power, it's recognition. When you hear Dolly, you know it's her, within a single word, a single sigh. That slight tremble, that mix of vulnerability and courage. It's the sound of a woman who has cried and kept singing anyway. Her voice reminds us that beauty doesn't come from control, comes from conviction. Dolly once said, "I think my voice sounds like home because it's built from all the voices that raised me." Her mother's hymns, her grandfather's sermons, the wind over the Tennessee hills. Each one shaped her tone, her phrasing, her spirit. So when she sings, you're not just hearing Dolly. You're hearing generations. You're hearing heritage turned into harmony. Over the years, her concerts became gatherings of gratitude. Strangers from different faiths, countries, and ages stood side by side, singing 9 to 5 like a national anthem of resilience. It didn't matter who they were. For a few hours, they were all family. That's the power of her voice. Doesn't divide, unites. Music's the only thing that can touch what words can't, she said once. And my job's just to keep it honest. But being the voice for every heart came with its own cost. When millions look to you for comfort, you have to learn how to carry their pain. Dolly did, quietly, faithfully. She answered letters from fans who'd lost loved ones. She visited hospitals, prisons, and schools. She sang for those who couldn't find their own voice anymore. She didn't see it as charity. She saw it as duty. "God gave me this gift," she said. "The least I can do is use it for good." When she performed gospel songs, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't a concert anymore. It was a communion. Her voice seemed to dissolve walls, turning arenas into sanctuaries. Tears fell. Hands rose. And for a moment, everyone felt seen. That's what made her timeless. Her faith wasn't doctrine, it was empathy, sung in perfect pitch. As she grew older, her voice deepened, softened, like oak aged in sunlight. But instead of fading, it became richer, more lived in, more true. She didn't chase youth. She embraced wisdom. Her voice became less about showing power and more about showing peace. When asked how she kept her voice strong, she smiled and said, "Honey, it's like my heart. I use it every day." Her songs continued to find new life through others. Whitney Houston, Miley Cyrus, Norah Jones. Each singer borrowed her melody, but the soul behind it remained pure Dolly. Because when someone sings her words, they don't just echo her, they join her. Her music became a thread that stitched voices across time. And that's how her art transcended mortality. It became collective. In interviews, she often said she wasn't sure how she'd be remembered. But she hoped that somewhere in some small house, someone would still hum her songs and feel a little less alone. "If I can be a voice for the broken, the brave, and the believers," she said, "then that's all the legacy I need." And she is. For the lonely hearts and the laughing ones, the tired souls and the dreamers still chasing dawn. Because her music doesn't belong to her anymore. Belongs to us. There's a reason her voice feels eternal. It was never meant to end. It was meant to echo. In churches, in kitchens, in the hums of mothers rocking their babies. In the hearts of those who still dare to sing. Dolly Parton's voice is proof that art doesn't have to be loud to be powerful, just has to be honest. The world has heard many singers, but only a few have spoken to every heart. And Dolly Parton, with her laughter, her light, and her limitless love, remains one of them, because her voice doesn't just sing, it listens. Chapter 24. Return to the mountains. Every journey, no matter how far it travels, eventually turns homeward. And for Dolly Parton, that home was not a mansion in Beverly Hills, nor a penthouse in New York. It was a small cabin in Sevier County, Tennessee, the place where dreams were born out of dust, hunger, and hymns. This is the chapter where the circle closes. where the star returns to the soil that made her shine. She never really left the mountains. Even when her name lit up marquees in Las Vegas, her heart stayed nestled between those Appalachian hills. She once said, "I carry the mountains with me. Every time I sing, I take a piece of home out into the world." To her, success was never about escaping her roots. It was about watering them so that others could grow. Every year, she made pilgrimages back to Locust Ridge. She'd walk the trails she once ran barefoot as a child. She'd visit her old home site, a single-room cabin rebuilt as a symbol of beginnings. She would stand there quietly, sometimes alone, the scent of pine and wood smoke thick in the air, and whisper, "Thank you," not to anyone specific, but to everything that shaped her, the hardship, the hunger, the hope. Dolly's return to the mountains wasn't just nostalgia, it was communion. She knew that roots don't just hold trees, they hold stories. And through her work, she turned those stories into legacies. Dollywood became more than a theme park. It became a living love letter to her hometown, employing locals, funding schools, preserving heritage. She said, "I built Dollywood so folks wouldn't have to leave to find dreams. They could grow 'em right here." That was her greatest act of devotion, turning memory into opportunity. When visitors step into Dollywood, they feel it. Not corporate polish, but heart. Every design, every song playing through the speakers, carries her touch. She walks the park in disguise sometimes, just to listen, to hear laughter echoing through the same hills that once echoed her own. In those moments, she doesn't feel like an icon. She feels like a girl again, barefoot, free, alive. "Home," she said once, "isn't a place, it's a rhythm. And mine always beats in these mountains." But homecoming also brings reflection. Dolly often spoke of how her family shaped her spirit. Her father, strong and quiet. Her mother, gentle but fierce. Both gave her the same lesson: work hard, love harder. When her father passed, she said it felt like a mountain itself had shifted. So she honored him in the only way she knew how, by dedicating the imagination library to his memory. "Daddy couldn't read or write," she said, "but he lived long enough to see his name on millions of books. That's my proudest moment." In her later years, Dolly found peace not in crowds, but in quiet. She spent more time in her cabin retreat, writing songs no one had heard yet. Not for albums, not for fame, just for herself. She said, "Sometimes I just write for God and the trees. They're the best audience anyway." There's something sacred about that image. A woman who conquered the world, returning to sing for the sky that first heard her. When she looks out over the Smokies at sunset, she doesn't see separation between past and present. She sees continuity. The girl who dreamed, the woman who achieved, the legend who returned. All three still live there. In the soil, in the streams, in the wind carrying the faint echo of a melody only she could have written. "Every time the wind blows through these hills," she once said, "I feel like Mama's calling me home." There's poetry in her story. The way it began and ended with the same sound. Her voice carried by the mountains. She knows her fame will fade someday. The lights will dim, the records will age, the stages will empty. But these hills will remain, singing her songs back to the sky. And in that echo, her legacy will never die. Because home isn't about where you start or where you end. It's about what you carry in between. For Dolly, that was love. Pure, constant, unconditional love. She gave that love to her fans, her family, and her people. And when she needed it most, it was the mountains that gave it back. "The earth remembers kindness," she said once. "And I've tried to leave a little of mine right here." In the quiet of Tennessee evenings, you can almost imagine her sitting by a fire, a notebook in her lap, a cup of coffee in her hand, a song forming somewhere between heart and heaven. The legend fades into the light. The music melts into the mountains. And the story comes full circle. The voice that left home to change the world returns home to rest within it. Dolly Parton's story began with a cabin and a dream. It ends, or rather continues, with a legacy that belongs not to her alone, but to everyone she ever touched. Because when you return to your roots, you don't go back. You go deeper. And in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, the little girl with the guitar is still singing, not for fame, not for fortune, but for home. Chapter 25. Stardust and Simplicity. Every story ends where it began, not in fame, not in noise, but in silence. And for Dolly Parton, that silence is not emptiness, it's peace. This final chapter isn't about the legend the world knows. It's about the woman she became when the lights dimmed, when the crowds went home, and all that remained was the soft glow of stardust and the quiet grace of simplicity. Dolly's life has always danced between two worlds, the cosmic and the common. She could fill stadiums and still fit in a kitchen. She could wear diamonds but still praise the dirt beneath her feet. That balance was her magic. The sparkle and the sincerity, two halves of a single shining truth. She once said, "I'm just a country girl with a big dream and a bigger wig." But behind the laughter was a deeper wisdom. She knew that real glamour doesn't come from glitter, comes from gratitude. Dolly never let success make her forget what mattered. She didn't chase luxury, she chased meaning. She said, "If you've got love, faith, and purpose, you've already struck gold." That was her philosophy, to live richly, not expensively. She didn't want her story to end with riches. She wanted it to end with richness of spirit. As she aged, she grew more radiant, not because of fame, but because she let go of everything that didn't serve her soul. She simplified her days. Fewer meetings, more mornings on the porch. Fewer flights, more prayers. Fewer crowds, more quiet. "I spent half my life trying to be somebody," she said once. "Now I'm just happy being me." That's the kind of peace you can't buy. The kind that only arrives when you've given the world everything you had to give. In her journals, she wrote about the joy of small things. The smell of biscuits baking. The laughter of nieces and nephews. The way the fog kissed the mountaintops at dawn. She said, "The little things are the big things. Stardust don't mean much if you can't still see the stars." It's that perspective that made her human, even when the world made her mythical. She once told a journalist, "People ask me if I'm proud of being a star. I'm proud of being a good person. Stardom fades. Kindness don't." That line could be carved into stone. The gospel of Dolly Parton. Because while others chased immortality through fame, she achieved it through humility. In her later years, she became even more generous with her wisdom. When young artists visited her, she'd smile and say, "Don't lose yourself chasing what shines. You already are the light." That's what she wanted people to remember. That worth isn't earned, it's remembered. You don't have to become somebody. You just have to return to who you already are. Dolly often spoke about death with peace, not fear. She said she wasn't afraid to leave, because she'd never truly be gone. "I'll be around as long as somebody hums one of my songs," she laughed. But then, more softly, she added, "And even after that, I hope there's a little of me left in the kindness people give to one another." That's not just legacy. That's eternity disguised as everyday life. If you look at her story from above, it reads like a constellation. Each song, each act of compassion, each laugh, a shining point of light, connected by the invisible lines of love. Together, they form something vast and human, a map of what it means to live fully. Dolly Parton didn't chase the stars. She became one, not in the sky, but in the hearts she touched. Her faith, her humor, her resilience, they all led her here, to a simple truth. All the fame and fortune in the world don't mean a thing if you can't be at peace with yourself. So she built a life of balance, between the glitz and the ground, between heaven and home. And in that harmony, she found her final gift, serenity. Now, when the sun sets over the Smoky Mountains, and the fireflies start to glow like tiny mirrors of the stars above, you can almost feel her presence, not as a celebrity, not as an icon, but as a soul finally at rest. The woman who gave light to millions now shines in the simplest of ways, in the laughter of a child opening a book, in the kindness of a stranger, in the sound of a song humming softly through an open window. And maybe that's the lesson of her life. You can spend your years chasing the spotlight, but the brightest light is the one you carry within. Because in the end, stardust fades, but simplicity endures. Dolly Parton, the woman of glitter and grace, the child of the mountains and the mother of music, taught us that greatness isn't about being remembered. It's about helping others remember themselves. And as long as her songs are sung, as long as her kindness echoes through time, her story will never truly end. Because legends may sleep, but love never does. The world measures success in gold and applause. But Dolly Parton reminds us, the truest wealth is how many hearts you warm. From the whisper of a cabin to the roar of arenas, she sang her way through every trial, never letting pain turn her bitter. Her story isn't just music, it's medicine. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. No matter where you start, you can turn your scars into songs. You can turn silence into symphony. You can build a kingdom from kindness. Because just like Dolly, your light, no matter how small, was never meant to stay hidden in the mountains.